Yo, what's up everyone? It's DC Harry, and today we're checking out, what if Raven found Harry at age 8 in cupboard and Demon's daughter fell in love with boy who lived merging their dark powers. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Cupboard Between Worlds. The pain was coming from somewhere it shouldn't have been able to come from. Raven sat cross-legged on the roof of Titan's tower, 300 feet above the bay, eyes closed, the city's emotional noise washing over her like weather she'd learned to stand in. San Francisco at 2 in the morning was never quiet. There was always someone grieving, someone furious, someone so in love it made her teeth ache with second-hand feeling, but she was practiced at sorting through it, finding the signal and the static, letting most of it slide past without catching. This didn't slide past. It snagged. She'd felt pain before. She was an empath who'd grown up absorbing the nightmares of everyone around her. She had a catalog of human suffering that would have broken most people 3 times over. But this was different. This pain had texture. It wasn't the sharp hot spike of physical injury or the slow gray weight of grief. It was old. Compressed. The kind of pain that had been folded and refolded so many times it had developed edges, become dense as a stone, and it was coming from a child. That was the part that caught her. A child's pain, concentrated enough that it had punched through dimensional space and tapped her on the shoulder from. She turned her attention carefully, the way you'd turn a compass, somewhere in England. Which was impossible. Her empathic range was exceptional, but it didn't span oceans. There was something else at work, some amplifier, some quality to this particular suffering that made it carry farther than it should. She opened her eyes. The bay glittered below her. The tower hummed faintly with the sounds of her teammates sleeping inside it. She sat with the feeling for another minute, testing it, not the pain itself but the shape of it, the particular flavor. There was something else woven through the hurt. Not hope, exactly. More like embers. The memory of warmth, buried deep enough that the cold hadn't reached it yet. Some part of this child still believed, against what felt like overwhelming evidence, that things could be different. That was what decided her. She pulled her cloak tighter, shaped the words in her mind, and let the darkness open. The transit between dimensions always felt like being briefly inside the idea of a place rather than the place itself, shadow and intention and the peculiar non-smell of dimensional seams. Raven moved through it the way she moved through most things, calmly, with complete attention, not wasting energy on the parts that were merely uncomfortable. She'd made crossings that would have shattered a less disciplined mind. A hop across dimensional planes to a parallel Earth was practically a commute. She emerged in a dark street in suburban England at what her internal clock told her was close to 3 in the morning local time. Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. She could feel the name of the place without knowing why, like the location had printed itself on her awareness alongside the coordinates. The houses were identical, aggressively so, each one trying to prove it was exactly as normal as its neighbors. Neat lawns. Sealed windows. The specific quiet of a neighborhood where everyone agreed, very strongly, not to notice things. The pain was coming from the house with the number 4. She stood outside it for a moment in the lamplight shadow, taking stock. Typical British semi-detached. Obsessively maintained garden. A car in the drive, freshly polished. Everything about it advertised respectability so loudly that her empathic sense immediately felt suspicious, because in her experience, places that worked that hard to look fine rarely were. The front door was locked. She walked through the wall. It was habit, not showmanship. She was here to find a child in pain, not to ring the doorbell and introduce herself to whoever was responsible. She moved through the entryway, past a living room with a large television and furniture that looked barely sat in, into a hallway, following the signal that was now close enough to be almost audible, like a frequency she could hear in her sternum. She stopped at the cupboard under the stairs. She stood there for a moment, her hand not quite touching the door. The concentrated weight of misery behind it was considerable even for her, and she had better shielding than anyone she knew. She breathed through it, adjusting, and then she opened the door. The boy inside was curled on a thin mattress in the approximate shape of someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. He was small, too small, she registered, with the clinical part of her mind noting it and filing it under deliberate, chronic. Dark hair, wild even in sleep, flopped over a face that was angular with malnourishment, with a jaw that hadn't quite filled in yet, with dark circles under closed eyes that spoke of sleep that wasn't restful even when it came. He had glasses, one arm held together with tape, folded on a shelf beside him like something precious. There was a bruise on his forearm. Old, yellowing, a week at least, but it hadn't been the only one. There was a scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt. Even in the near dark she could feel it. It was warm, and it resonated with something that made the hairs on her arms stand up, something that wasn't the child's own energy, something other layered over and threaded through him, old and foreign and deliberately hidden, like a tick burrowed deep enough to evade notice. She crouched down, studying him without touching him, reading the emotional residue of the space. The cupboard was saturated, years of it, loneliness and hunger and the constant low-grade terror of existing in a place where your existence was treated as an imposition. There were no toys. A single rolled-up blanket. The mattress had a spring poking through on one side. She was going to have to make some decisions about what she was doing here, and she was going to have to make them quickly, because the boy's breathing had changed. He'd sensed her, on some level, the way children in chronic danger often develop the ability to sense changes in their environment. He woke up fast. Not gradually, not the slow surfacing of someone roused from comfortable sleep. He snapped awake, eyes open, and had himself pressed into the far corner of the cupboard in one motion with the kind of practice speed that meant he'd needed to do it before. He stared at her. She waited. He didn't scream, which surprised her. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the cloak, the gem on her forehead, the faint luminescence of her gray skin in the dark, and his face went through several things very quickly: fear, assessment, something that was almost curiosity, and then a kind of careful stillness that was more unsettling than the fear had been. "Are you real?" he whispered. "Yes," she said. She kept her voice quiet and even, the same tone she'd used to approach something wild and hurt. "My name is Raven. I'm not going to hurt you." He considered this. His eyes were very green, she noticed. Vivid, the way natural things could be vivid, almost startlingly alive in a face that was otherwise drawn and exhausted. "People who say they're not going to hurt you usually are," he said. "That's accurate," she agreed. "As a general rule. But it's not always true." Something shifted in his face. He wasn't relaxing exactly, but he was recalibrating, and the intelligence in his assessment of her was striking. Most children she'd encountered in extremis were too frightened to think clearly. This one was doing both simultaneously. "You came through the wall," he said. "Yes." "How?" "I can move through solid objects. It's a power I have." He was quiet for a moment. "I've made things happen sometimes. When I was scared or angry. Glass broke once. I got on a roof when I didn't want to be somewhere." He said it flatly, without emphasis, but she could feel the complicated knot of shame and wonder and carefully suppressed hope underneath it. He'd been punished for those things. She could feel the echo of it. "That's magic," she said. "Real magic. It's not something you should be ashamed of or afraid of." His breath did something complicated. "They say he stopped. Started again. They don't like it. The people in this house. My aunt and uncle." The words carried very little emotion on the surface. The depth underneath them was considerable. "And my cousin. What's your name?" He looked at her for another second, still processing her, still running whatever calculus an 8-year-old running on 3 years of systematic neglect used to decide whether to trust something. Then, "Harry. Harry Potter." She felt the name land against the foreign energy threaded through his scar and felt the energy react to it, slightly, like a needle twitching toward north. "Interesting. Troubling." She filed it. "Harry," she said. How long have you been sleeping in here? Always, he said. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true. Since before I can remember. She looked at the bruise on his arm again. Did someone do that? He pulled his sleeve down. The movement was automatic, practiced. I fell. She didn't push it. Are you hungry? He went very still. Then, a bit. She reached into the pocket of her cloak. Her cloak's pockets existed in a small pocket dimension that she'd organized with ruthless practicality, and produced a protein bar and a bottle of water. She set them on the mattress between them and moved back, giving him space. He looked at the food, then at her, then back at the food, and she could feel the war in him between pride and the simple animal need that had been present so long it had its own weight. He ate. Not slowly, but with a kind of deliberate control, like he'd learned to make things last, to not let desperation make you obvious about need. She watched the way he rationed each bite and felt something settle hard and cold in her chest. Why are you here? He asked, around the last of the protein bar. I felt your pain, she said. From very far away. I felt how much of it there was, and I came. He thought about that. From where? A different dimension. A parallel version of your world, sort of. It's complicated. Oh, he said. And then, after a moment, that's well weird. Despite everything, she almost smiled. It is, a bit. Are you human? The question was blunt and without cruelty. He simply wanted to know. She appreciated that. Half, she said. My mother was human. My father is. She paused, looking for the right words. She never usually explained this to people, hadn't done it in a long time, because most people's reaction to my father is an interdimensional demon overlord who wants to use me to conquer everything was not useful. But Harry Potter was looking at her with those vivid eyes and that thin face with an openness that felt almost dangerous, and she found herself finishing the sentence. My father is a demon. Quite a powerful one. The kind that entire dimensions write prophecies about. He looked at her for a long time. Then, so is that why you have, he made a gesture at his own forehead, indicating the gem. Partly. It helps me focus power. She touched the jewel briefly. It keeps things contained that would otherwise cause problems. I think I might understand that, he said, and there was something in the way he said it, quiet, precise, that made her look at him more carefully. 8 years old and he was already developing a framework for managing power he'd been taught was monstrous. The parallel wasn't lost on her. How often do they hurt you? She asked. They don't, it's not, he stopped. Looked at his hands. Then, very quietly, my cousin mostly. Vernon when he's really angry. Aunt Petunia doesn't usually but sometimes he stopped again. They don't hit me a lot. It's mostly other stuff. What other stuff? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then the words came out in a flattened monotone that was worse than emotion would have been, no food sometimes. The cupboard. Being told I'm wrong and strange and unwanted enough times that, he stopped. Swallowed. Looked up at her with those green eyes and said, with a directness that cost him something, I know I'm not, by the way. Wrong and strange. I mean I know I am strange. But I don't think strange means wrong. I've been working that out. 8 years old. Systematic neglect and regular punishment and not enough food and he was sitting in his cupboard at 3 in the morning telling her he'd been working out the difference between strange and wrong. Something moved through her chest that she didn't have a ready category for. Not pity, she'd learned early that pity was useless. Something more like recognition. The particular experience of being told your nature was a problem, and having to find, entirely on your own, the bedrock-level refusal of that idea. You're right, she said. Strange isn't wrong. Are you going to take me away from here? The directness of it hit her. He wanted her to. He was doing a good job of not letting that want show too clearly, of keeping it contained in the same place he kept everything else, but she could feel it, the hope of it was the brightest thing in the cupboard. She sat with that for a moment, thinking. The honest answer was complicated. She'd come here impulsively, following pain across dimensional lines without a plan, and she was now sitting in a cupboard in Surrey at 3 in the morning looking at an 8-year-old with magic in him and a foreign energy buried in his scar and some kind of significance she could feel but not yet name, and she had to be honest with him because he'd already had enough of dishonesty dressed as protection. "I can't take you permanently," she said. "Not tonight. The dimensional anchor isn't stable enough for that yet, and where I'm from, my world, doesn't have the kind of magic you have, and you'd lose access to something you're going to need." She watched his face. He was processing, not breaking. "But I can come back. I will come back. And before I leave tonight, I'm going to make some changes to this house." He looked at her. "What kind of changes?" "The kind the people who live here won't enjoy arguing with." His mouth did something. It wasn't quite a smile, she had a feeling smiling freely was something he'd unlearned, but it was the shape of where one might eventually be. "Okay," he said. "I need you to show me where your uncle sleeps first," she said. He led her out of the cupboard, moving silently on bare feet with the practiced quiet of someone who'd learned that sound attracted consequences. She followed him through the dark hallway, reading the house's emotional landscape as they went, the son's bedroom saturated with aggressive entitlement, the master bedroom layered with fear pretending to be superiority. She noted the size of Dudley's room, crammed with toys, overflow stacked in the second bedroom that should have been Harry's and wasn't, and noted the well-stocked kitchen that Harry had clearly not been regularly allowed access to, and noted the way Harry moved through his own home, like a ghost, like an intruder, like someone who'd internalized the message that he belonged to the least possible portion of the space. She didn't wake Vernon Dursley. She stood in the doorway of the master bedroom and let her shadows move quietly through the room, reading the man's dreaming mind with clinical detachment. She did this rarely and never casually, but she needed to understand the specific architecture of what had been done to Harry before she could address it, and what she found in Vernon Dursley's sleeping mind was both unsurprising and deeply unpleasant, not a monster in the Gothic sense, just an ordinary and comprehensive cruelty built from fear of the abnormal and a profound, unexamined conviction that Harry's suffering was an inconvenience that Harry himself was responsible for. She left a nightmare in his mind. Not a violent one, she wasn't interested in that, but the specific nightmare of consequences. The dream that someone was watching. That there was a record being kept. That the weight of what had been done to a child in this house had a shape and a name and that shape was coming. It wouldn't change him. She was realistic about that. But it would make him careful. She stopped next at Dudley's room, assessed, and left a different kind of impression, a vague, persistent discomfort that would attach itself to the act of targeting Harry specifically. She was not proud of this. But she was practical. She went back to the kitchen, opened cabinets, took stock. Then she spent 20 minutes doing something she'd never done before, using her telekinesis to reorganize a kitchen so that the accessible shelves contained food and the locked cabinet, where the good food was kept, she discovered, away from Harry, was opened and its contents distributed more equitably. She was thorough about it. She also found, in a drawer, a spare key to the cabinet, and that she simply dissolved. Harry watched all of this from the kitchen doorway with wide eyes. "They're going to notice," he said. "They will," she agreed. "The important thing is that you can eat. Don't be strategic about it, just eat normally. Act like it's always been this way. If they try to relock anything, I've made the locks cooperate with you." She'd adjusted the tumblers on every lock in the kitchen with small, precise manipulation. They would open for Harry's hand and stick for everyone else's. It was petty and she was fine with that. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't fully parse, too many things moving through it. "Why?" he said finally. "Not demanding. Just asking." "Because you deserve to eat," she said. "And because I'm coming back, and when I do, I want to find you in better condition." He nodded slowly. When are you coming back? Soon. And often. She reached into her pocket dimension and produced something she'd been carrying for some time without particular purpose, a small hand mirror, about the size of a paperback, framed in dark metal worked into an abstract pattern that had always felt right to her, which was reason enough to keep it. She held it out to him. This is a communication mirror. In my world, it works on the same principle as certain magical objects in yours, 2 mirrors, single connection. When you hold it and say my name, I'll know, and I'll find a way to respond. I have the paired one. He took the mirror carefully. How do I, just say Raven? I'll feel it. She touched her fingertips briefly to the glass and felt her soul self thread through it, establishing the link with a precision that required concentration but not effort. The mirror pulsed once, faintly violet, and she felt Harry feel it through the glass, felt his startlement at the sensation, his instinctive curiosity already overriding his caution. Good. You felt that. It felt warm, he said, staring at the mirror. That's the link settling. Don't lose it. I won't. He was holding it the way she'd held the few things she'd ever genuinely valued, not clutching, but with a very complete kind of attention. She crouched down to his level, which put her nearly eye to eye with him, and she looked at him directly and said, Harry. Listen to me. You are not what they've told you you are. You are not a burden or a problem or something to be managed. You have magic that's real and significant, and there are people I haven't told you about yet, because you should have time to just be a child first, who are going to come for you in a few years and want to use that magic for their own purposes. When that time comes, you need to know what you actually are, not the version they've prepared for you. He was very still. Listening with his whole body. Can you do something for me before then? She asked. What? Read everything you can get your hands on. About everything. History, science, whatever they'll let you have from the school library. Not to impress anyone, just because the more you know, the more you'll be able to tell the difference between someone helping you and someone managing you. Those two things can look very similar from the outside. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's what's been happening here, isn't it? They've been managing me. Yes. Something settled in his face, the specific expression of a suspicion confirmed, which in an 8-year-old meant the unsettling thing had become slightly less overwhelming because at least now it had a name. I thought so, he said. I didn't have the word for it. She stood. She should go, the dimensional anchor would hold for a while yet, but extended stays in a parallel dimension without preparation had compounding costs she was too disciplined to ignore. She took one more reading of the house, the sleeping Dursleys, the reorganized kitchen, the altered locks, the nightmare settling into Vernon's mind, and judged it functional. Not good. But better, and better was what she had to offer tonight. Get some sleep, she said. Real sleep. The kind where you're not listening for footsteps. That's harder than you're making it sound. I know. Try anyway. She turned toward the hall. Raven. She turned back. He was standing in the kitchen with the mirror in both hands, the wild dark hair and the thin face and the lightning bolt scar and those extraordinarily green eyes, and he said with the deliberate careful articulation of someone saying something true for the first time out loud, I'm glad you're real. She felt that land somewhere deep and stay there. So am I, she said. She walked through the front wall of 4, Privet Drive at 4 in the morning, crossed the immaculate front garden, and opened the dimensional seam at the edge of the lamplight. Behind her, she felt the mirrors link like a warm thread extending across the gap. She kept that feeling in mind as she stepped through. 3 years was a long time and not long at all. Raven came back 8 days after the first visit, then 12 days after that, then the gap narrowed until she was crossing over roughly once a month, then once a fortnight, building the anchor gradually, layering the dimensional pathway so it became more stable with each use. She was systematic about it. She was systematic about most things. The transit became routine, evening, after Titan's Tower's obligations were handled, opened the seam, stepped through, arrive at Privet Drive or wherever Harry had managed to position himself when he used the mirror. He used the mirror with restraint. That was the first thing she noticed. Most children his age, she'd encountered enough of them, would have called every day, just to use the link, just to know they could. Harry called when he had something to say. He'd figured out quickly that the mirror worked better when neither of them were talking and just sat with it sometimes. She'd learned to recognize the feeling of his attention through the link, distinct from his words, a quality of presence that was specific to him. Focused. Slightly wry. Consistently more self-possessed than someone who'd been raised the way he'd been raised had any business being. He'd started reading. Voraciously, carefully, with the specific intensity of someone who understood that knowledge was the first and most reliable form of protection. He'd worked through the school library in under a year, had quietly convinced his teacher to let him have access to the secondary school library 2 streets over, and had developed opinions. Strong ones, which he expressed in the careful measured way of someone who'd learned that having opinions required you to defend them. She'd started telling him more about her world, the Titans, the dimensions, her father, the nature of her powers, and found that he received all of it with an attentive lack of drama that she appreciated enormously. He didn't perform shock or amazement. He asked precise questions. He retained everything. She'd told him about magic in his world, what she'd been able to research between visits, and he'd told her that some of it tracked with things he'd felt but couldn't explain, and that the foreign energy in his scar sometimes felt like a second heartbeat, which told her the Horcrux was more deeply integrated than she'd hoped, though not yet active enough to be immediately dangerous. The Dursleys had changed, not into good people, that wasn't on the table, but into frightened ones, which for Harry's practical purposes amounted to roughly the same thing. Vernon had begun treating Harry with the specific avoidance of a man who'd been having recurring nightmares for 3 years and had developed a persistent superstitious certainty that something was watching him. He didn't know what. He preferred not to find out. Petunia had taken a different path, not warmth, because that wasn't available in her, but a kind of brittle correctness, doing the minimum that looked passable from the outside, feeding him adequately, not touching him. It was cold and impersonal and a significant improvement. Dudley had developed, over the same period, a highly specific reluctance to single out Harry that his friends found baffling and that Dudley himself couldn't explain, just a persistent feeling, when he considered going after his cousin specifically, that something unpleasant would happen. Something with shadows. Harry, for his part, had grown. Not just the physical growing that time enforced on children, though he was taller, healthier, still slightly too thin but no longer the hungry gauntness of before, but the internal kind. Raven had watched it happen across the monthly visits, watched him move from the careful contained watchfulness of someone perpetually braced for a blow to something more assured, not cocky, not aggressive, just present in a way he hadn't been at 8. He stood straighter. He met eyes. He still didn't smile easily or often, but when he did, it was without the flinch quality that had characterized his first ones. He was 11 now. He'd been 11 for 2 months. The letters had started arriving 4 weeks ago. She came through on a Wednesday evening in late July to find Harry at the kitchen table with a stack of identical cream envelopes, each bearing the same emerald green seal, each addressed in the same flowing script to Mr. H. Potter, The Cupboard Under the Stairs, 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. He was reading one of them with an expression she'd learned to identify as his particular version of fascinated exasperation. "They've been coming every day," he said, without looking up. "The Dursleys tried to stop them and then an absolutely unreasonable number of them came through the fireplace and then Vernon boarded up the mail slot and then they came down the chimney. How many do you have now?" He gestured at the stack without turning around. She counted. There were 47 envelopes. "You knew this was coming," she said. "You told me it would." He set down the letter he was reading and turned to look at her. In 3 years, the green eyes had developed a particular quality, not harder exactly, but more definite. Like something that had been blurred had come into focus. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I've been reading about it for 2 years. Established 990 AD, for founders, Current headmaster Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, who also defeated a dark wizard called Grindelwald in 1945 and has approximately 17 positions of authority that suggest someone with a significant accumulation of institutional power and the human tendency to see that as confirmation they should have more. He said this completely flatly. Raven looked at him. You've been thinking about him. He placed me here. No heat in it. Just the statement of a fact that had been examined from every angle and filed in its appropriate place. He knew what this house was, or he should have known, anyone with his resources should have, and he put me here anyway. The question is why? He picked up the nearest envelope, turned it over. I've got some thoughts. Tell me. The note my mother left with me, I've found out about it from a couple of sources. There's a witch at the corner shop who's been progressively less subtle about knowing who I am, said something about a protection. Blood magic. My aunt's house is a shelter because Petunia shares my mother's blood. He laid the envelope down. If the protection is key to the blood of my mother's family, I need to be here to reinforce it annually. Voldemort, and he said the name without a flinch, which was notable. He told her most people in his world couldn't manage it, has people who survived, and the blood protection buys time. He paused. That's the charitable interpretation. The other one is that a child kept isolated and mistreated and made to feel he owes the wizarding world his discomfort is much easier to point at a problem than a child who grew up knowing his own value. Raven sat down across from him. Through the kitchen window, the August evening was going orange and slow. Both things can be true at once. I know. That's the complicated bit. He looked at her with an expression that was specifically his, that combination of clarity and something underneath it that was more uncertain but well maintained. Am I going to Hogwarts? Do you want to? Yes. No hesitation. I want to learn. I want to know what I actually am, not just the pieces of it I've been able to work out from school libraries and you and the witch at the corner shop. And, he paused, the smallest pause, then finished, I want to understand the foreign thing in my scar. I want to know what it is. It's a piece of Voldemort's soul, she said. She'd been waiting for the right time to tell him this. There was, she'd concluded, no good time, which meant now was as good as any. A fragment. He split his soul through repeated acts of murder, and when he tried to kill you and your mother's protection reflected the curse back at him. Your scar is what was left. A piece of him anchored in you. Harry was very still. That's why it's warm sometimes, he said finally. Yes. It's not active yet, he's not powerful enough to use the connection. But it's there. Can it be removed? I'm looking into it. She held his gaze. It's not urgent yet. But yes, eventually. He nodded, absorbing it. Then, when you came the first night, I felt you noticed the scar. I didn't say anything because I didn't know what it was and I wasn't sure how to ask. You were 8. I've been 8 for 3 years, he said, which made her blink, and then he almost smiled. I just mean I've been thinking about that night since it happened. You came through a wall at 3 in the morning and you were gray and you had a jewel on your forehead and instead of being scared I was mostly just, he searched for the word, interested. Is that strange? For most people it would be. I'm not most people. No, she said. You really aren't. Something passed between them, she felt it in the mirror link even though they were in the same room, as if the connection existed on a layer underneath words. And then Harry stood and picked up the stack of Hogwarts letters and said, I should write back. How do you write back to owls? You'll need to write a reply letter. They'll send an owl. I don't have an owl. I imagine once you reply, they'll provide one. She stood. Before you do anything, there's something else you should know. Gringotts, the Wizarding Bank, your parents had vaults. Significant ones. There are likely holdings and possibly a family seat that have been in administrative hold since their deaths. His expression shifted. How significant? I spent some time researching the Potter family history. They're old money in wizarding terms, old name, political connections that have presumably been dormant for 10 years. You're not just Harry Potter the boy with the scar. You're the last of a significant family line, and you should go into Gringotts knowing that, because institutions treat you according to what you know about yourself. He looked at her for a long moment. You've been preparing for this. For 3 years, she said. Roughly. Since you came through the wall. More or less. He turned the Hogwarts letter over in his hands. Then he looked up at her and said, "Come with me. To Diagon Alley. When I go to get my supplies. I can maintain a dimensional anchor there long enough for a few hours," she said, having already calculated this. "Yes. I'll come." "Good." He set the letter down. "I'd rather not walk into it completely alone." She thought of him at 8 years old in the dark of a cupboard, already working out the difference between strange and wrong, already building the bedrock refusal of what they'd tried to make him. She thought of 3 years of visits and letters and the mirror warm on the thread between them, and she thought he had done remarkably, stupendously well at not being alone. "You haven't been alone," she said. "For a while." He looked at her steadily for a moment, and this time he did smile, the real one, the one without the flinch quality. "I know," he said. "I just meant I want you there." She held that for a moment. "Then, I'll be there." Outside the kitchen window, the summer evening finished going orange and shifted into gold, and somewhere upstairs, Vernon Dursley was having his recurring nightmare and didn't know why, and somewhere across a dimensional barrier a tower rose above a bay where the fog came in from the Pacific, and in a kitchen in Surrey an 11-year-old boy with a lightning bolt scar and vivid green eyes sat with a half-demon girl and started writing a letter that would change everything, and neither of them was afraid. Diagon Alley was exactly as strange as Raven had expected, which meant it was strange in ways she hadn't anticipated, because she'd been to actual dimensions that weren't strange in quite the same way as a vertical street of improbable architecture crammed with an entire culture's commerce that existed 6 inches outside normal London. She'd anchored herself with more preparation this time, spent a week on the crossing, building the pathway until it was as stable as anything she'd managed without a permanent anchor point. She manifested in an alley off Charing Cross Road at 9 in the morning, solidifying next to Harry, who'd arrived via the Dursleys' car in a silence that apparently covered a conversation he and Vernon had managed with the minimum possible words, which Harry reported with the serene equanimity of someone who'd learned to treat the Dursleys as weather. She'd modified her appearance slightly, reduced the grey of her skin to something that could pass for an unusual complexion in certain lights, covered her gem with a small piece of enchantment that made it seem like an unusual tattoo to those who weren't looking carefully. She kept her cloak. It was her cloak, she wasn't going to remove it for the benefit of normality. "You look different," Harry said, looking at her. "I blended down slightly." "You don't have to." "I know." She'd thought about that. "It's tactical. I'm here to help you navigate this. If I'm the thing people look at, that's inefficient." He considered this and nodded, accepting it the way he accepted most things she explained, not uncritically, but recognizing the internal logic. "Fair enough." They went through the leaky cauldron, which Harry navigated with the help of a letter that had eventually arrived specifying entry instructions, and which required passing through a pub full of wizards who noticed Harry the moment he crossed the threshold with a collective quality of attention that Raven found immediately informative. The whispers started before they were halfway through. The Potter whispers. The Itzham whispers, tinged with reverence and complicated history. Harry walked through it steadily. He didn't slow down or speed up. He didn't look around at the staring faces. He'd been practicing, she realized, for exactly this. He'd been expecting it, had prepared himself for the quality of attention, and had decided in advance not to let it make him small. Good. Gringotts was first. Harry had agreed with her reasoning about that without argument. Know what you have before you go shopping. The goblin who assessed his key, the one left by his parents, small and gold, found by Raven in the Dursleys' kitchen drawer in a box of miscellaneous kept and forgotten things on her 3rd visit, looked at it, looked at Harry, looked at Raven with the specific quality of goblin attention that indicated he was performing a comprehensive assessment and finding her interesting, and disappeared into the back for 4 minutes. He came back with a senior goblin who introduced himself as Ragnarok and asked Harry, with careful courtesy, to accompany him to a meeting room. They sat across from Ragnarok in a room that smelled of old metal and stone while the goblin laid out, with precise goblin efficiency, the state of the Potter family accounts. The summary was substantial. The Potter family had 3 active vaults, the trust vault left for Harry, a sealed family vault requiring a blood age key that would open on his 11th birthday, which had been 2 months ago, and a third vault that Ragnarok described as managed, which turned out to mean placed under administrative hold at the request of a standing magical guardian in a way that had diverted certain interest accruals to. And here Ragnarok paused with the careful stillness of a goblin who had opinions he was choosing to express through precision rather than declaration, unspecified charitable purposes, with no line-item accountability. Harry looked at this document for a moment. Then he said, "When did the administrative hold begin?" "November 2nd, 1981, said Ragnarok. "The day after your parents' deaths." "And who is the standing magical guardian?" Ragnarok placed a second document on the table. Harry looked at it. Then he looked up at Raven. "Albus Dumbledore," he said. His voice was completely level. She said nothing. She'd suspected. She could feel Harry processing it, not with rage, which would have been understandable, but with the particular quality of someone fitting a piece into a picture that had been incomplete and finding that the picture was clearer and worse than the incomplete version had suggested. "I'd like to assume full control of all vaults," Harry said, to Ragnarok. "And I'd like a full accounting of any disbursements from the managed vault since November 1981, and I'd like the administrative guardian status removed." "You're 11, said Ragnarok. "Typically, what does Goblin law say about it?" Harry asked. "Not wizarding law. Goblin law." Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Raven could feel the goblin's assessment of Harry shift by several degrees. Goblin law recognizes account ownership as absolute at any age for those who can present the appropriate blood and key identification, he said. Wizarding law imposed the Guardian framework. We comply with it because wizarding law governs this territory. A pause. We comply with it officially. Harry looked at him steadily. And unofficially? Unofficially, Gringotts has had certain concerns about the managed vault's accounting for some years. And officially, nothing prevents us from issuing a full statement of account to the account holder regardless of guardian status, since that information is the account holder's right under all applicable frameworks. Then I'd like the statement, Harry said. Ragnarok almost smiled, which for a goblin was approximately as significant as a human breaking into tears. We'll have it ready by the end of today's visit. When they emerged from Gringotts into the gold-drenched noise of Diagon Alley, Harry had a cart full of money and an expression that was very, very quiet. You're not surprised, Raven said. I'm angry, he said. But no, not surprised. You told me both things could be true at once. He might believe in what he's doing. He might even be right that I needed the blood protection. That doesn't make any of the rest of it okay. He paused on the steps of Gringotts, looking out at the alley. I'm going to know what I'm going into now. That's what matters. She stood beside him. Around them, the alley hummed and moved, and people glanced at them and looked quickly away, and she thought, here is an 11-year-old who just found out the man who placed him in a cupboard has also been quietly mismanaging his family's money, and he's standing in the morning sunlight choosing clarity over rage. What do you want to do first? She asked. Wand, he said. That's the most important. And then, I want to find the books that aren't on the standard list. She followed him down the steps and into the alley, and somewhere in the managed complexity of the day the thread of the mirror link hummed warm between them, and Harry Potter, who was not the boy anyone had planned for or prepared for, not the manageable grief-stunned orphan or the vessel waiting to be pointed at a problem, walked through Diagon Alley in the August morning and knew exactly who he was. Ollivander's was a narrow, dust-thick shop crammed floor-to-ceiling with narrow boxes, and the wand maker himself emerged from the dimness with the quality of a man who'd been expecting something and was now assessing whether reality matched his expectations. He looked at Harry for a long time without touching the wands. "Harry Potter," he said. "I remember every wand I've sold, Mr. Potter. I remember the wand that gave you that scar." Something moved through his pale eyes. "Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple." The phoenix gave only 2 feathers. The other wand, he looked at Harry's scar, then at Harry's face, then at Raven, and whatever he registered in Raven's presence made him pause. "And your companion? You're not from this world." "No," Raven said. "Dimensional traveler." He looked at her with the quality of someone who read things in objects and had learned to extend that reading to other things. "I don't have a wand for you." "I don't need one," she said. "No, I expect you don't." He turned back to Harry. "Right. Let's find your wand. It may take some time. You're not simple." It took 45 minutes and 37 wands, each one either inert or producing effects that made Ollivander step back with increasing fascination. The 38th was Holly and Phoenix Feather, 11 inches, the twin core to the wand that had given Harry his scar, and when Harry's fingers closed around it, Raven felt it from across the room, a resonance that moved through the mirror link like a struck bell, warm and complex and very specifically him. Ollivander looked at the shower of red and gold sparks Harry's wave produced and said, "Curious. Very curious." He looked at Harry. "You know what it means? That this wand chose you. That its brother wand's phoenix gave the other feather," Harry said. "Yes. I know about the twin cores." Ollivander blinked. Then he looked at Raven again, briefly. "You've prepared him." "He prepared himself," she said. "I helped." Something passed through Ollivander's face, something complicated and perhaps relieved, and he accepted Harry's payment with the air of a man who had just witnessed something he was going to be thinking about for a long time. They were back on the street when Harry held the wand for a moment, feeling its weight, and then looked at her. "It's the twin," he said. "That's a complication." "Or an advantage," she said. "Depending on how you use it." He turned the wand over once. Then he slipped it into his pocket with a decisiveness that suggested he'd already decided which interpretation he was going with, and said, "Books next," and led the way down the alley, and the morning burned gold around them, and everything was beginning. Chapter 2, What Owls Don't Carry. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry Potter was on it 20 minutes early. He'd found platform 9 3/4 without difficulty. Raven had researched the barrier mechanics thoroughly enough that Harry had simply walked through the wall at a normal pace without the anxious hesitation she'd observed in other students who clustered near the entrance, working up nerve. He'd found a compartment near the middle of the train, stowed his trunk with the casual ease of someone who'd been levitating objects since he was 9 and had simply never told anyone, settled in with a book, and was 3 chapters deep into the nature of elemental transfiguration, a critical survey by the time the platform filled with the noise of families saying goodbye. The book was not on the standard Hogwarts reading list. He had 14 books that weren't on the standard list, selected with Raven's input over the course of their Diagon Alley visit and a subsequent second trip he'd managed alone. He'd read 7 of them already. He'd also read all the standard texts twice, the second time with annotations, some of which would have startled their authors. He watched the platform through the window with the peripheral attention of someone who found people consistently more informative than they intended to be. The families said their goodbyes in ways that told him things, the particular tightness of the hugs, the instructions being pressed on children who were clearly not listening, the clusters of students who already knew each other, moving with the ease of shared history. He noticed a family of redheads, enormous and loud and warm in a way that made something move through his chest before he filed it away. He noticed a girl with very bushy hair and her parents, who were watching the magical platform with the particular wide-eyed amazement of people from outside this world encountering it for the first time. He noticed a pale blonde boy surrounded by adults who held themselves like people accustomed to being held aside for, and made a note of the way the boy looked at other students, assessing, categorizing, already doing the social math. He noticed a man in purple robes moving through the platform with the practiced ease of someone who belonged everywhere, pausing to speak with families, dispensing the kind of warm attention that looked spontaneous and wasn't. Old. Tall. Enormous silver beard. Half-moon spectacles that he peered over with an air of gentle wisdom that was, Harry had concluded from 3 years of thinking about it, both entirely genuine and entirely strategic. Albus Dumbledore paused near Harry's compartment window. Their eyes met through the glass. Dumbledore smiled. It was warm and encompassing, and the eyes above it were doing something much more attentive, reading, measuring. Harry held the eye contact for a steady 3 seconds and then deliberately returned to his book. He felt the quality of the headmaster's attention change, a slight recalibration, a reassessment. Good. The train began to move. 40 minutes out of London, the compartment door slid open and Ron Weasley looked in, already slightly rumpled, with a smear of something on his chin that he was apparently unaware of, and said, "Everywhere else is full." "Can I?" "Yes," Harry said, without looking up from his book. Ron sat. There was a pause. Then, "What are you reading?" Harry showed him the cover. Ron squinted at it. "Is that on the list?" "No." "Is it good?" "Very." He glanced up. Harry Potter. Ron's reaction was immediate and involuntary, a visible start, a flicker of something between awe and the specific embarrassment of having already been casual with someone you'd been told was significant. Then, to his considerable credit, he visibly decided to handle it like a person. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Sorry, I didn't recognize you straight away." "Good," Harry said. "I'd rather be recognized slowly." Ron blinked. Then he laughed, which seemed to surprise him, and something relaxed in his face. "Fair enough." He settled back. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone a bit more," he gestured vaguely, "famous about it." "I've been famous my whole life," Harry said. "I didn't know about it until recently, so I didn't practice the face." Ron laughed again, more naturally this time. "My brothers have been going on about you since I can remember. Fred and George mostly, they've got theories. Mum made me promise not to." He stopped, seeming to realize this was a sentence he shouldn't finish. "Not to bother me?" Harry guessed. "Not to stare," Ron said, which was close enough to the same thing that they both understood it. He was looking at the lightning bolt scar and then looking away, the way everyone did. Harry had made peace with this. "Does it hurt?" "The scar?" "Sometimes," Harry said. "Less than it used to." He didn't explain more. Ron, to his credit, didn't push. They talked for a while about the wizarding world, Ron's experience of it, which was extensive and familial and warm, full of a family that used magic the way other families used cutlery, naturally, constantly, with the casual ease of total integration. Harry listened to the Weasley household sounds that came through in Ron's descriptions and felt something that was partially envy and primarily just interest. A different life. A possible shape of something. The bushy-haired girl appeared in the doorway halfway through their conversation, looking composed in the way of someone who'd prepared conversation starters in advance. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "A boy named Neville's lost one." She assessed them both rapidly. "I'm Hermione Granger." "You've got dirt on your nose, by the way," she added to Ron, matter-of-factly. Ron looked mortified. Harry looked at Hermione Granger and saw immediately, extremely intelligent, already anxious about the impression she was making, using competence as social currency because other kinds hadn't worked reliably. She had the specific energy of someone who'd found that being very good at things was simultaneously her best quality and the thing that kept people at arm's length. "Harry Potter," he said. She looked at him, recalibrated fast, said "Oh," recovered faster. "Have you done the reading yet?" "All of it." "Twice," he said. Her expression shifted into something genuinely interested rather than performative. "What did you think of the Transfiguration text?" Oversimplified on the theory side and very good on the practical. The section on partial transformations ignores some foundational work that Marchbanks published in the 60s. Hermione sat down without being invited, which Harry counted in her favor, and said, "Which work?" with the energy of someone who'd found a genuine conversation. Ron watched both of them with the patient amiability of someone who liked people even when they were being strange, which Harry was also filing away as significant. They were still talking, the three of them, having found Neville Longbottom's toad, Trevor, through the simple method of Harry sitting very still in the compartment and murmuring something in what sounded to Ron like hissing that produced a groggy toad from under the seat, which both Ron and Hermione observed and then, by some mutual unspoken agreement, decided to process later, when the trolley came and the train rolled through the gathering English dark toward Scotland and Harry Potter. Decided, with the specific deliberateness of someone choosing rather than drifting, that these were people worth knowing. The boats across the lake were the first time Hogwarts stopped being a concept and became a thing. Harry had read about it. He'd looked at sketches and descriptions and historical texts, and none of it had prepared him for the reality of the castle rising from the black water with its towers and battlements and 10,000 lit windows throwing gold into the night, massive and ancient and humming with contained magic so densely layered it was practically audible. He felt it from the boat, the same way he'd felt the wand's resonance, the same deep channel recognition that was below thought. His own magic responded to it. He felt it in his chest, in his hands, in the scar, which pulsed once warmly and then settled. Hermione made a sound beside him that she would probably have been embarrassed about if she'd been aware of making it. Ron just said, "Blimey," very softly. Neville Longbottom, in the boat behind them, gripped the side with white knuckles and looked up at the castle with an expression that was equal parts terrified and overwhelmed in the way that sometimes was the same as joy. Harry looked at Hogwarts and thought, "I live here now." It was not a complicated feeling. It was, in fact, the least complicated feeling he'd had in years. The giant of a man, Hagrid, the groundskeeper, who had a quality of warmth so genuine it was almost uncomfortable to receive, like standing too close to a fire after being cold for a long time, shepherded them through the entrance, and then they were in a hall and there was a stern-faced woman with a pointed hat looking at them in the way of someone who had done this many times and continued to take it seriously. Professor McGonagall. Harry had read about her too. Transfiguration Professor, head of Gryffindor, considered by the staff to be the second most formidable person in the building. He watched her assess the first years, the practiced eye cataloging, sorting, deciding, and watched her pause, briefly, on him. He met her gaze steadily. Her chin lifted a fraction. She disappeared. The first years murmured around him. A ghost came through the wall, several ghosts, actually, mid-argument, and Harry watched them with interest, noting their particular magical signature, the difference between the residual emotion of a ghost and a true echo, which Raven had told him about and which was apparent now that he knew what to look for. The boy with the blonde hair appeared at his elbow. "Harry Potter," he said, with the specific quality of someone who'd rehearsed the approach. "I'm Draco Malfoy." "I know," Harry said. Malfoy blinked. "You know. The Malfoy family is one of the oldest in Wizarding Britain. You were pointed out on the platform." Harry looked at him with the same steady attention he gave everything. "What do you want?" The bluntness took Malfoy off balance, which Harry had intended. He recovered quickly. He was sharper than he wanted people to think, Harry noted. The arrogance was partly performance, partly genuine, and the genuine part was armoring something more complicated underneath. "I wanted to introduce myself. And to say, some families are better than others, and you should be careful about who you associate with." A glance at Ron, laden with significance. "I'll keep that in mind," Harry said pleasantly. "I'll also keep in mind that advice about who to associate with, from someone I've known for 40 seconds, is less about my welfare than about something else." Malfoy stared at him. "What you said about some families," Harry continued, "is a thing people say when they want to establish hierarchy before the hierarchy is established officially. I understand the impulse. The sorting hasn't happened yet and everyone's trying to figure out where they stand." He looked at Malfoy with something that was genuinely not hostile, just precise. I'm not available for hierarchy. But I'm not your enemy either. He turned back toward the hall. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. Then, not quite managing to keep the surprise out of his voice, "You're strange." "Yes," Harry agreed, without turning around. Behind him, he heard Ron muffle something that might have been a laugh. The Great Hall was enormous and the ceiling was the sky, and Harry sat beneath the stars and watched first years get sorted, running through what he knew about the Sorting Hat, a thinking, feeling object saturated with 1,000 years of its creator's intent, capable of genuine conversation, making decisions that were roughly categorizable but not algorithmic, and prepared for his conversation with it. What he had not prepared for was the length of it. Most of his year were sorted in under a minute. Some considerably less. When the hat settled over Harry's eyes and the great hall blurred into brown darkness, the hat was quiet for a long moment, and Harry was quiet back, and then the hat said, in a voice that existed only in his head, "Well. This is interesting." "Hello," Harry said. "Most of them don't say hello. Most of them are 11-year-olds who've just been handed a magical hat." "What do you see?" "I see considerable things." The hat's attention moved through him in a way that was distinct from Raven's empathic reading, less emotional, more architectural, like someone mapping a building's rooms. "Courage." "Certainly. But you've chosen that, haven't you? It wasn't given to you." "Loyalty, also chosen, carefully, not yet widely extended but deeply meant where it exists. Intelligence of the kind that doesn't perform itself. And underneath all of it, something I haven't encountered in some time." "What?" "Will." A pause. "Not ambition. Not the desire for power. The specific quality of a person who has decided, against evidence that would have broken most people, that they are going to be okay. That's not a house quality. That's a person quality. It makes you very difficult to sort. Where do you think I belong? That's rarely the right question." The hat moved through him again. "You could thrive in any of them. Slytherin would give you the tools for the war coming, and it is coming, you know that, you've been preparing for it. Ravenclaw would feed your mind. Hufflepuff would give you something you haven't had enough of, people who value you simply for existing rather than for what you represent. And Gryffindor? Gryffindor would give you a family." The hat said it simply. Not without complication. The house has a heroic streak that can become recklessness, a culture of charging forward that sometimes mistakes bravery for wisdom. But it also has, another pause, more careful this time, it has people who will love you, Harry Potter, not because of what you can do or what you represent but because of what you are when you're tired and uncertain and real. I think you've gone without that long enough." Harry was quiet in the darkness beneath the hat. "Yes," he said finally. "That's the answer. Gryffindor." The hat shouted, and the red and gold table erupted, and Harry pulled the hat from his head and set it back on the stool and walked to the table with the specific clarity of someone who just had a decision confirmed, and the cheering washed over him, and he sat down, and Ron slid in beside him grinning, and across the hall he could feel Dumbledore watching him with that warm, measuring attention, and at the staff table a man in a purple turban had gone very still. Harry looked at the man in the turban with the casual glance of someone simply taking in his surroundings. The man had two emotional signatures. One was the surface one, nervous, eager to please, the particular anxious quality of someone who feared drawing attention. The other was deeper and colder and felt like something Harry had felt before, in his scar. Foreign. Layered. The specific texture of a presence that wasn't entirely the person it was riding. Harry looked away. He'd think about that later. He picked up his fork as the feast appeared and felt Neville Longbottom drop nervously into the seat across from him and offer a tentative smile and said, "Hello, Neville. How's the toad?" and watched Neville's whole face reorganize itself with relief at being addressed like a person, and thought, this is also the work. He used the mirror that night. Gryffindor Tower was quieter than he'd expected after midnight, the common room empty, the fire burning low, the portrait of the fat lady snoring softly behind her canvas. He sat in the deep window seat with the mirror in his lap and the Scottish hills dark beyond the glass and said, simply, Raven. The mirror warmed within 30 seconds. Her face appeared in it, or rather the quality of her presence. The mirror's display was less visual than it was a sense translation, her attention rendered in the glass as the particular grey-blue light that was specific to her. How was it? She said. Gryffindor. I thought it might be. The hat said it would give me a family. He paused. That felt true. Is the castle what you expected? No. Better. He looked out the window at the dark hills and the sky full of stars and thought about how to say it. It's alive. I know that sounds like how people talk, metaphorically. I mean literally. It's a thinking place. I can feel it. The magic's so old it's developed something like preferences. That tracks with what I know about places where large amounts of emotion and intent have concentrated over centuries, Raven said. The castle will probably respond to you. It already has. My trunk ended up in exactly the right spot in the dormitory without me levitating it. I assumed I'd done it automatically, but I don't remember doing it. Yes. That'll be the castle. A beat. What about the other thing? He knew what she was asking. The Transfiguration Professor is exactly what the sources said. Stern but fair. I think she's a person worth respecting. He paused. Dumbledore watched me during the sorting. He's doing the kind of watching that's also assessing, running projections, wondering if I'm what he expected, recalibrating. I think finding out about Gringotts made him adjust something. He'll have been informed. Ragnarok wouldn't have notified him directly, but the Guardian status change would have registered. She was quiet for a moment. And the other thing? The Quirrell problem, Harry said. Yes. Tell me. He has 2 signatures. The top one is his own, scared, genuinely, not performing it. The underneath one is the thing in my scar, or something like it. Something foreign wearing a human nervous system. It's not completely integrated, there's friction between them. Voldemort possessing someone. She said it plainly. It was a theory, but now it's confirmed. He needs a physical anchor while he's this diminished. He can't be removed without killing the host, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Probably not conventional removal, no. I'm not going to kill Quirrell, Harry said, just as plainly. I know. I wouldn't ask you to. A pause. But we need to understand what he's after. Something in this school. The Philosopher's Stone, Harry said. Flamel's Stone. I've done the reading on Flamel and Dumbledore's working relationship, and the most logical conclusion is that the stone has been relocated here for protection. If Voldemort is in the school, that's what he's after. Which means the protection mechanisms are already in place. Yes. I haven't found them yet, but I will. He turned the mirror over in his hands briefly, then back. I'm going to need to be careful about how I manage this. If I deal with the stone situation too obviously, Dumbledore will know I know things I shouldn't know according to his model of what I am. What do you want to do about that? Use it, Harry said. Let him think I know less than I do for as long as that's useful. He's going to try to manage me, Raven. I could see it in how he watched me tonight. He has plans for me, and those plans depend on me being a certain kind of person. And you're not. I'm not. He looked out the window. The first star he could see was very bright and very cold above the hills. I'm going to be fine. The friend situation seems promising. Ron Weasley is genuine, that's rare. Hermione Granger is extraordinary and doesn't entirely know it yet. He paused. Neville Longbottom is frightened of everything and might be one of the bravest people here. How do you know that about Neville after one day? People who are frightened of everything and still show up are the bravest ones, Harry said. By definition. Across the mirror's connection, he felt something from Raven that wasn't translated into words or even quite into emotion, more like a quality of presence, warm and specific, the dimensional equivalent of sitting beside someone in a comfortable silence. He'd felt it hundreds of times through the link across 3 years, and it still did something to his chest that he hadn't categorized yet. "Get some sleep," she said. "First classes are tomorrow." "McGonagall teaches Transfiguration first years in the morning," he said. "I'm looking forward to it." "Don't show everything at once." "I wasn't going to." A pause. "I was going to show about 60% of it." "Harry." 50%. "There he is," she said, and he could hear the dry edge of it, and he smiled, the real one, the one that came without the flinch quality, which it could do now, which it could always do when it was just her, and said good night, and she said good night, and the mirror went dark, and Harry Potter stretched out in his 4-poster bed in Gryffindor Tower for the first time and fell asleep in under 4 minutes, which was the fastest he'd managed in 11 years. McGonagall opened the class by turning her desk into a pig and back again without apparent effort, and while most of the first years were still making the sounds associated with their first encounter with real-scale transfiguration, Harry had already worked out the mechanism from the brief viewing and filed it under confirm with practice. She distributed matches. The goal was to turn a match into a needle. This was, he knew, a classic first exercise because it required not just the correct incantation and wand movement but the specific quality of intention that Transfiguration demanded, not wanting the match to become a needle, but knowing it was already a needle in essence, which was a philosophical distinction that most 11-year-olds would spend several weeks arriving at. He turned his match into a needle in approximately 2 minutes, by which time Hermione was still on her first serious attempt and Ron was on his third. McGonagall appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the needle. She picked it up, turned it over, set it down. It was, by any standard, a flawless needle. "Good," she said, in the tone of someone choosing a word carefully. "Can you tell me what you were thinking when you did it?" He looked up at her. She was watching him with an attention that was not quite the calculating quality Dumbledore's had been but more the interest of a teacher encountering something that required adjustment of approach. "I was thinking about the match's material structure and the needles and identifying them as the same thing in different configurations," he said. Not asking it to change. Recognizing that the change was already a property of what it was. A silence. "Where did you learn that?" she said. "I've been reading about transfiguration theory for about 2 years. He met her gaze. "I can do the second-year exercises as well, if that helps calibrate things." McGonagall put him in the seat next to Hermione for the remainder of the class and gave them both a jointly more advanced exercise, which they completed at roughly equal speed via completely different methods, and which produced between them a conversation that was still going 20 minutes into lunch. "The theory you were using is from the Marchbanks Critical Survey," Hermione said, with the barely contained energy of someone who'd found a conversation they'd been waiting for. "I read that too. I thought the bit about partial transformations was underdeveloped, but the structural identity argument is foundational," Harry agreed. "More than the standard text admits." "McGonagall looked at you like you'd done something slightly alarming," Hermione said. "And I've been told I do that and I know what it looks like." Harry smiled. "She'll recalibrate." "That's very calm of you. She's a good teacher." Good teachers like students who are further along than expected. They just have to get over the initial surprise. Hermione studied him for a moment with the specific quality of someone running a new data set. "You're not what I expected," she said. "I've read about you, obviously. Quite a lot. The books they're mostly rubbish, actually, I think, they treat you like a story rather than a person, which seems disrespectful." "They do," he agreed. "I've read some of them. They're creative." "How are you so?" she gestured without finishing. "Okay," he offered. "I was going to say composed, but okay works too." He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I had help," he said. "Someone helped me figure out the difference between strange and wrong. I had a few years to work on it." He looked at her. "You've been figuring the same thing out on your own." She went very still. "I can see it," he said. You've worked out that you're not too much. Or you're most of the way there. You've got maybe the last 20% left. A long silence. Then Hermione Granger, who had apparently been waiting for something true to be said to her for quite a while, lifted her chin and said, "Right. Yes. I think that's accurate." And then, after a moment, "Who helped you?" "A friend," he said. "You'll meet her eventually." Her. Hermione noted, with the specific quality of someone who had a question she was choosing not to ask yet. "Yes." He picked up his fork. "What did you think of the potions reading?" She was off immediately, and Ron came back from the food queue and dropped his plate down and said, "What are we talking about?" And Harry said, "Potions theory," and Ron made a face and said, "We haven't even had potions yet, can't it wait?" And Hermione said, "Preparation is the foundation of competence, Ron," and Ron said, "That's either very true or very terrifying." And around the table the noise of Gryffindors was warm and loud and constantly in motion, and Harry ate and listened and thought. Yes. This was worth choosing. Potions was Snape, and Snape was a study in compressed damage performing as authority. Harry had read about him, the bare minimum available in published sources, which was, brilliant brewer, complex reputation, Slytherin house head, known for a particular severity toward Gryffindor. What the published sources hadn't said and what Harry read the moment he walked into the dungeon classroom was the specific texture of the man's contained self-immolation. Snape stood at the front of the class with his black robes and his precise contempt and the quality of someone who'd built a personality out of a wound and was now required to maintain it constantly because dismantling it would mean examining what was underneath. He called roll with the practiced cruelty of a man who'd refined the exercise. He paused at Harry's name in the specific way of someone who'd been waiting for it. "Harry Potter," he said. "Our new celebrity." Harry looked up from his notebook. He met Snape's eyes steadily, without the flinch, without the performed carelessness, just, directly. Snape's eyes were black and they did the same thing Dumbledore's half-moon glasses had done at the feast, assessed, recalibrated, something flickering through them that was quickly suppressed. He'd been expecting deference, or nervousness, or the specific combination of fame awareness and insecurity that he'd presumably prepared to exploit. "Yes, sir," Harry said, pleasantly. Snape blinked, almost. "Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" This was a second-year question wrapped in a first-week test, asking something well beyond the curriculum to establish hierarchy, to catch the famous student knowing less than expected. "A sleeping potion of such power it is known as the draught of living death," Harry said. The asphodel's properties being a death-associated flower of the lily family, a meaningful choice of components, and the wormwood contributing the specific suspension quality that distinguishes the draught from simpler sleep draughts. He paused. In Victorian potion-making tradition, asphodel combined with wormwood was also a coded expression of deep, enduring regret. There's some scholarly argument about whether the potion's inventor intended that symbolism deliberately or whether it accumulated through use. The dungeon was very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through the black eyes that Harry didn't have enough data to categorize yet, not quite anger, not quite the thing that came after surprise. He moved on through the roll without further comment on Harry, and Harry wrote in his notebook, and didn't look pleased with himself, and didn't look anywhere except at the page. Ron leaned very slightly toward him after class and whispered, "How did you know all that?" "I read the books," Harry said. "We all read the books." "I read the Victorian ones too," Harry said, and Ron shook his head in the way of someone who decided to find this fundamentally charming. The broom arrived by owl on a Thursday in mid-October. It arrived with a note from Professor McGonagall that said, with characteristic economy of language, that Harry had been made the youngest seeker at Hogwarts in a century, that this was to be kept quiet, and that training began Saturday. It said nothing about how she discovered his flying ability, though Harry suspected the answer was the incident on Wednesday in which he'd caught Neville's Remembrall at approximately the velocity of a mistake and had pulled out of the dive maybe 6 feet from the courtyard stones. It also arrived because Draco Malfoy had taken the Remembrall and Harry had gone after it, and that sequence had been the result of a brief interaction in which Malfoy had done the specific kind of targeted cruelty that Harry had been cataloging since primary school and that he'd chosen to respond to in the most efficient possible way, which was, remove the object of the cruelty, neutralize the power dynamic, and disengage. What he hadn't planned on was how it felt to be on the broom. It felt like the castle had felt from the boats, that recognition, deep channel, his magic resonating with something that was asking it to move, to extend, to be in motion. He was a natural flyer in the way that some things are natural, not easy, not automatic, but right, the way the wand had felt right when Ollivander's hand placed it in his. The broom was a tool, but it was also a dialogue, and he and the broom were apparently going to speak the same language. He was at the top of the school at 200 feet before he consciously decided to be there, the remembrall clenched in his fist and the Scottish wind hitting his face with the particular blunt sincerity of northern weather, and he looked out at the grounds and the lake and the forest and the mountains beyond all of it, and felt, briefly, cleanly, something he was only just learning to recognize as joy without complication. He told Raven about it that night. "You already knew you could fly," she said. "I knew I'd gotten on the school roof once when Dudley's friends were chasing me. That was survival. This was, different." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't expect the difference." "Different how?" He thought about how to say it. "You know how you told me about the soul self? How it feels when you let it out?" A pause. "You're saying flying feels like that?" "A bit. Yes." Another pause, longer, with a quality he couldn't quite read. "That's good," she said finally. "That you have something that feels like that. You sound like you're thinking about something." "I'm thinking that it's good," she repeated, and the quality of the mirror's warmth was slightly different. She was being careful with something, or around something, and he filed it away with the other things he was collecting and hadn't categorized yet, and they talked about other things, and the fire burned low in the common room, and he slept. November arrived with cold and Quidditch practice and the particular social dynamics of a first-year Gryffindor group that had organized itself into something coherent over the weeks. Hermione's social edges had smoothed somewhat, she'd begun to trust the intelligence in Harry's company and Ron's goodwill and was allowing herself the luxury of being occasionally wrong about things without treating it as catastrophic. Ron was who he was, which was consistently generous and intermittently exasperating and possessed of a chess brain that Harry found genuinely impressive. Neville had attached himself to the group with the grateful tenacity of someone who'd been granted something he hadn't expected, and who rewarded inclusion with a steady, unobtrusive loyalty. Harry moved through these friendships with the deliberateness that he brought to most things, knowing what they were and what he was building in them. He didn't perform closeness that wasn't real. He also didn't hold back what was. The one thing that was harder to manage was the way certain adults kept watching him and he kept having to decide how much of what he noticed to show. Dumbledore watched him at every meal. The attention had the quality of someone who'd expected a specific puzzle piece and found a different shape. Harry performed, with careful calibration, approximately the version of himself that Dumbledore would find reassuring, curious, bright, modest, appropriately awed by the wizarding world. He was curious and bright, he moderated the rest. Snape had not repeated the first class's targeting. He was severe and exacting and markedly harder on Gryffindors, but he'd settled into a specific relationship with Harry that was less the anticipated contempt of celebrity and more the complicated dynamic of a man who didn't know what he was looking at and found that intolerable. He gave Harry's work exact marks, not reduced ones, and made occasional cutting observations that Harry received without visible effect, which seemed to frustrate Snape considerably, which Harry found, in private, somewhat entertaining. Quirrell was the one he was most carefully watching without appearing to watch. The double signature had become more familiar, he could read it in 20 seconds now, could feel the particular tension of the foreign presence wearing Quirrell's fear like an ill-fitting coat. Whatever was under the turban was present but not powerful enough to act directly, which was the saving grace. Voldemort at this strength was dangerous primarily because of what he could convince Quirrell to do. He didn't yet know how to address it without triggering a defensive reaction. He was thinking about that on a Wednesday evening in early November, walking back from the library through a corridor on the third floor that he'd noted with interest was locked on the right-hand side, when something moved in the darkness to his left and resolved, in the faint torchlight, into a large three-headed dog. It was behind the door. The door was slightly open. The dog, all three heads of it, was looking at him. Harry stopped. He stood perfectly still for 3 seconds, reading the animal. Three-headed dogs were known in multiple mythological traditions, most prominently as guardians. Cerberus, which was the template this creature was clearly derived from, was a guardian of thresholds, specifically. The creature was agitated but not hunting, its attention was directed at him because he'd made noise, not because he'd breached its territory. He felt for it the way he sometimes felt for things, the low-register sense that wasn't quite Parseltongue but was related to it, the awareness of something living's essential nature, and the dog's nature was, guard, threshold, remain, guard, threshold, remain. It was doing its job and it knew someone was there and it was deciding. Easy, Harry said, to it, quietly. I'm not going through the door. One of the three heads made a sound that was not exactly a growl, more the beginning of a growl, reconsidered. Harry looked at the floor inside the door, through the gap, at what the dog was standing on, and saw the trapdoor. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the door, carefully, and continued down the corridor. So. There was something under the dog. Something worth a three-headed guardian. In a corridor that Dumbledore had specifically announced was forbidden to students, which meant it was either a test or a trap or a precaution, and probably all three simultaneously, because that was how Dumbledore appeared to operate. The Philosopher's Stone, Raven had said. The protection mechanisms are already in place. Harry filed it, continued down the corridor, and was back in the common room writing his charms essay with every appearance of normality when Hermione arrived from the library and sat across from him and said, "You look like you're thinking about 6 things at once." 4, he said. The other 2 are passive. She looked at him for a moment. Then, what did you find? He looked up. You have a specific expression when you found something you're storing, she said. I've learned it. What is it? He considered her for a moment, the intelligence of her, the fundamental trustworthiness that was built into her make, the way she used information to protect and build rather than to accumulate. Then he said, 3rd floor corridor. Her eyes widened slightly. The forbidden one? Yes. There's a 3-headed dog guarding a trapdoor. He watched her process this. And there's something under it that I suspect Dumbledore has placed here for safekeeping. Hermione was quiet for precisely the time it took her to cross-reference what she knew about Dumbledore's relationships and current events, which was slightly faster than most people would take. Nicholas Flamel, she said. I think so. And someone in this school wants it. Yes. She looked at him for another moment. What are we going to do? He picked up his quill again. Learn, he said. As much as we can. As fast as we can. And wait until we know enough to be useful rather than just moving around in the dark. He looked up at her. Also, don't do anything that confirms to Dumbledore that we know what we know. Why not? Shouldn't we tell him? He already knows there's a problem, Harry said. He put the stone here because something threatened it at Gringotts. He put a 3-headed dog on it. He knows. He's managing it. Then what are we, preparing, Harry said, for what happens when his management isn't enough? She stared at him for a long moment, and something shifted in her expression, the shift from finding him reassuring to finding him slightly alarming, which he thought was probably appropriate, and also the shift on the other side of that which was something like, oh. This person is actually going to handle this. Okay, she said, slowly. Okay. She pulled out parchment. Then we'd better start learning everything we can about the stone. Harry smiled. I've got 3 books that might help. 2 of them aren't on the library list, which means you're going to have to trust my sources. Where did you get non-library books? I have a friend with an excellent non-standard reading list and access to non-standard places. The friend, Hermione said. The her. Yes. She looked at him with that particular Hermione expression that meant she had questions in queue. Are you going to tell me about her? Harry was quiet for a moment, thinking about grey skin in torchlight, about a hand not quite touching a door, about 3 years of a thread warm across dimensional distance, about I'm glad you're real and the specific thing it felt like when the mirror went warm and she was there. Eventually, he said. Yes. Hermione, to her considerable credit, simply nodded and pulled the books toward her and opened the first one, and the fire crackled in the hearth and the tower hummed with old living magic and outside the windows Scotland was dark and cold and immense, and Harry Potter was not afraid of any of it. Chapter 3, The Sorting of Shadows. The troll smelled like something had died inside something else that had also died, and then both things had been left in standing water for a week. Harry registered this from approximately 40 feet away, through the girls' bathroom door, where the 10-foot mountain troll was currently engaged in the deeply focused activity of destroying everything it could reach. He could hear it, the wet crash of stone meeting porcelain, the grinding of its club against tile, and underneath it, barely audible, a girl's voice doing the specific thing voices did when someone was too scared to properly scream. Hermione. She'd been in the bathroom when Quirrell had let the troll in. Harry had worked that out in the 30 seconds between the feast's pandemonium and now, Quirrell's pale face, the theatrical feint, the timing too precise for coincidence. The troll was a distraction or a test or both, and Hermione was in the path of it because she'd been crying in that bathroom all afternoon, which Harry knew because he'd noticed her absence at lunch and her reddened eyes at breakfast and had been planning to say something and hadn't yet, which was a failure he intended to correct immediately. Go get a teacher, he said to Ron, who was beside him in the corridor. You're going in there, Ron said, reading him with the accuracy of someone who'd spent 3 months learning to read him. Yes. Then I'm coming too. Ron, Hermione's our friend, Ron said simply, in the tone of someone for whom this was an argument-ending statement. Let on. Harry led on. He pushed the door open and the smell hit them with force and the troll turned, all 3 tons of it, and it was bigger up close than the word troll had suggested, with a head like a boulder and small stupid eyes and a club the size of a young tree. Harry took in the space, the cubicles, the window too small to be useful, the sinks Hermione was pressed against with her back to the wall and her hands over her head, the troll between her and the door, the troll between her and everything. The troll raised its club. Harry didn't think. He moved. He was between the troll and Hermione before the club started its downswing, and he pointed his wand and said Wingardium Leviosa with the specific intent of someone who wasn't experimenting with a feather, and the club went up. The troll's arm went with it, surprised, and then the club was ceiling level and Harry released the spell and the club came down on the troll's own head with a wet crunch that was the most satisfying sound he'd heard in his 11 years. The troll sat down. Then it lay down. Then it stopped moving. The bathroom was very quiet. Water dripped from a broken pipe. Harry lowered his wand, checked his hands, steady, and turned to Hermione. She was staring at him with wide brown eyes. Not at the troll, which was the thing most people would have been staring at. At him. Are you hurt? He asked. She shook her head, once, mechanically. Right. McGonagall is going to be here in approximately 3 minutes based on the time it takes teachers to respond to a troll alarm and the distance from the Great Hall. Do you want to be found in here with an unconscious troll or do you want to have already left? Hermione blinked. The blink seemed to reconnect her to her functioning mind. We should stay. If we run and they find us later it looks suspicious. Yes. I agree. Harry stepped back from the troll, giving it a wide berth, and moved toward the door. Can you stand? I'm standing, she said, which was technically true though she was also holding the sink. Okay. He stood beside her, not touching, giving her space to compose herself. Ron had come in after the troll went down and was looking at it with an expression of pure, undisguised awe. You levitated its club, Ron said. You levitated its club. It seemed the cleanest solution. It's the size of a tree. The spell scales to intent, Harry said. Intent was high. The door opened. McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell came through in rapid succession, and took in the scene: unconscious 10-foot troll, wet and broken bathroom, 2 11-year-old boys and a girl who was collecting herself visibly. McGonagall's face cycled through approximately 5 expressions very quickly. What? She looked at the troll. How on earth? I levitated its club, Harry said. It hit itself. We're fine. Hermione was here when the troll came in and we couldn't leave her. McGonagall looked at him. Then at Hermione. Then at Ron. She was doing the math: the troll was unconscious, not dead, the children were uninjured, the spell required was 3rd-year level minimum with this scale of target. That was very foolish of you to come in here, she said, and the expected speech was clearly available to her, the one about endangering yourselves and the rules around student behavior, and she began it, and then she looked at Harry again, and the speech came out shorter than it was supposed to. 5 points to Gryffindor. A pause that felt like she was internally revising upward. Each. 4, sheer presence of mind. Snape, Harry noticed, had said nothing. He was looking at Harry's wand, which Harry had not yet pocketed, and at the troll, and at Harry again, with a complex expression Harry was adding to the file he was building on Snape's complicated relationship with the expectation of him. Quirrell was staring at the floor and sweating. Harry looked at Quirrell for exactly as long as was natural and no longer. Later, walking back to Gryffindor Tower, Hermione fell into step beside him. She was back to herself, faster than he'd have expected, which told him something new, but there was a quality to her silence that was different from her usual one. You knew I was in there, she said. Before the troll alarm. You knew I was upset. Yes. You were going to say something. Tonight. I was planning to tonight. She was quiet for a few steps. Why does it matter to you? We've been friendly. But you didn't have to, she stopped. You're my friend, Harry said, without elaboration, using Ron's phrasing because it was the right phrasing. An argument-ending statement. Hermione's breath caught, very briefly, the specific sound of someone receiving something they decided not to expect. Then she said, in a perfectly level voice, yes. All right. Good. And then, after a moment, you knew the troll was Quirrell's doing, didn't you? Not a question. Yes, Harry said. She processed this. Then, it was a distraction. Or a test. Or both. For the stone. Probably. She was quiet for the rest of the walk. When they reached the fat lady's portrait she turned to him with the expression of someone who had made a decision. The 3rd-floor corridor, she said. We should start understanding what's down there. Carefully, Harry said. Obviously carefully, she said, with the specific Hermione inflection on obviously that had become, over 3 months, something he found consistently entertaining. She said the password and the portrait swung open and the common room enveloped them in warmth and noise and the collective energy of Gryffindors who'd spent the evening being frightened and were now very loudly not being frightened anymore. Neville appeared immediately and looked at all 3 of them with the intense, slightly overwhelmed relief of someone whose threat model had been confirmed and resolved in the same evening. You're all right, he said, with feeling. We are, Harry confirmed. There are rumors, Neville said. People are saying you fought the troll with your hands. With a wand, Neville. There's a version going around that involves no wand at all. Harry looked at Ron. Ron put his hands up. I told exactly what happened. I cannot control the amplification process. The amplification process took approximately 20 minutes, Harry observed. Hogwarts students are very creative, Ron said, picking up a plate of food from the table someone had brought up from the kitchens. You should be flattered. The no-wand version has you punching it. There's something to be said for the image. Harry sat down and ate and let the noise of the common room settle over him and thought about Quirrell, and Snape watching his wand, and the trapdoor, and the stone, and the complex mechanism of everything that was already in motion around him like weather gathering before a storm you couldn't see yet but could feel in the specific pressure of the air. He'd tell Raven tonight. She'd have thoughts. She always had thoughts. The mirror was warm before he said her name. She'd felt something. She told him that when she appeared in the glass, the quality of her presence carrying a precision that meant she'd been paying attention through the link. I felt it earlier, she said. Something with high emotional charge. Are you all right? Fine. He told her about the troll, briefly and factually. A pause. You walked into a room with a mountain troll. I levitated its club. Harry. Hermione was in there. The pause this time had a different quality. Then, okay. Yes. Yes, that's what you do. Not exasperated, exactly. Something else that he couldn't pin down with the mirror as medium. What about Quirrell? It was his. I'm certain now. He shifted on the window seat, looking out at the dark grounds. I need a better sense of what's under the trapdoor beyond the dog. If Voldemort moves through Quirrell to get the stone, I need to know what I'm dealing with. I've been thinking about the stone, Raven said. Specifically about what Voldemort's soul fragment does when it gets a permanent body. Right now he's weak, the possession is costly to both of them. With the elixir of life from the stone, he regains permanence. With permanence comes the connection to the other soul fragments. Harry went still. Other fragments. Horcruxes. Plural. I've been researching. Her voice was even, but underneath it in the mirror link he felt the specific quality of someone who'd been sitting with very unpleasant information for some time. The magic to make one requires murder and the deliberate fracture of the soul. To make multiple requires more than one. The ritual's not common knowledge, but the theory is traceable if you know where to look. How many? Harry asked. I don't know yet. At least 2 others, possibly more. The diary is one I've identified specifically. The magical residue is traceable through certain obscure German texts on soul anchoring. She paused. And your scar, Harry? Yes. You don't seem surprised. I've been considering it for a while. The foreign presence is consistent with a Horcrux. The difference is I don't think it was intentional, I think it happened when the killing curse rebounded. Voldemort's soul was so fractured that the rebound cracked off another piece and it anchored in the only living thing present. Which was you? Which was me? He said it plainly. So the question of removal becomes important eventually. I'm working on it. She was quiet for a moment. I touched the resonance of it once, through the link. The fragment in your scar. I want you to know that. He looked at the mirror. When? About 8 months ago. You were asleep and the link was open and I wanted to understand it better. She paused. It reacted to me. Reacted how? Recoiled. A beat. My father's energy and Voldemort's energy come from the same source family, interdimensional corrupted darkness. The fragment in your scar recognizes my nature and it doesn't like it. Another pause, and this one carried a quality he was better at reading now. She was deciding how much to say. Which means my soul self might be a mechanism for its removal, eventually. I haven't fully worked out the method. But you think it's possible? I think it's possible, she said. I'm not going to do anything until I'm certain. The risk of getting it wrong, I know. Take the time you need. He looked out the window. Thank you for telling me. Always, she said, and the words sat in the mirror link with a warmth that was simple and complete, and he held it for a moment the way he held the few things he genuinely valued, not clutching, just with full attention. I'm going to need to find out what's under the trapdoor, he said, coming back to practical ground. Without making it obvious. Can you map the castle? I've been doing that informally. I think there might be a passage that runs near the third-floor corridor. I need to test it. He paused. There's also the question of the Mirror of Erist. The what? Erist. Desire spelled backwards. An artifact that shows the viewer what they most deeply want. Dumbledore has it in the school. I'm fairly certain the stone's final protection involves it. The principle is elegant. The stone can only be retrieved from the mirror by someone who wants to find it but not use it. Someone whose deepest desire is not the stone itself. Which excludes Voldemort, whose deepest desire is his own restored power. Exactly. He was quiet. It would not exclude me. My deepest desire is not the stone. He felt something move through the link. She was reading this carefully, deciding something. What is your deepest desire? She asked, and her voice was very even. He thought about the mirror. About what it would show him. He had a sense of it, not a certain image, but a shape, a quality of warmth and presence in someone beside him in a way that wasn't obligation or management but choice, freely made, repeatedly renewed. I think I know, he said. I don't think I need to say it yet. A long pause. Okay, she said, and the quality of that word in the link was something he was definitely storing in the uncategorized file, which was growing. Come soon, he said. The anchor should be stable enough for a longer visit. Soon, she agreed. Sleep, Harry. He did. December brought frost and Quidditch and a charms exam that Hermione finished first and Harry finished second and Ron finished seventh but passed comfortably, which Ron celebrated with a completeness that Harry found quietly instructive about the difference between Ron's actual relationship with academic achievement and the performance of carelessness he sometimes put on around it. Harry played his first Quidditch match on a Saturday morning in bitter cold, as seeker for the Gryffindor team. The captain, Oliver Wood, a sixth year who had responded to Harry's tryout with the specific energy of someone receiving a gift they'd wanted for a long time and were slightly afraid to trust, had briefed him on strategy with a thoroughness Harry respected. Harry had listened, asked precise questions, and on match day done exactly what he'd planned to do, which was, find the snitch, watch it, wait until the time was exactly right, and move. The time was exactly right at 22 minutes. He caught the snitch in a 200-foot dive that ended 6 inches from the ground with the snitch squeezed in his right fist and the crowd doing something that was more noise than sound, and he pulled out of the dive with the same instinct that had taken him up in the first place, the broom and him in complete agreement about what was possible, and climbed back up into the cold Quidditch sky just to feel it for one more moment before the game ended. He won the match for Gryffindor. He was aware of this. What he was also aware of, in the celebration afterward, was that his broom had done something strange during the dive, had shuddered, briefly but distinctly, in a way that wasn't aerodynamic but felt more like a conflict of wills. Something had been interfering. He thought about Quirrell in the stands. He thought about Snape, who had been muttering, eyes fixed on Harry's broom, throughout the interference, which had stopped when Hermione, who had apparently drawn the same conclusion by a different route, had knocked into Quirrell and broken his eye contact. He would talk to Raven about the broom interference tonight. He would also, he decided, thank Hermione, who had responded to a threat while it was happening and had not waited for more information, which was a kind of courage that didn't always get recognized as such. Thank you, he said to her, during the celebration in the common room, quietly enough that it was between them. She looked at him. You knew about the jinx. I suspected. You confirmed it with the action. He looked at her steadily. You made a decision under pressure with incomplete information. That's harder than it looks. She was quiet for a moment. Then, it was Snape. Wasn't it? The jinx was Snape. The motivation is more complicated. What do you mean? He considered how much to tell her. Hermione was extraordinary, he'd confirmed that across months of shared proximity, and she had the kind of mind that could hold complexity without simplifying it, which was rarer than it should have been. I don't think Snape is on Voldemort's side, he said carefully. I think he's on Dumbledore's side, which is a different thing, and I think he's been told to watch me, and I think jinxing my broom was his version of a test, seeing if I could handle interference, seeing what happened. That's terrible, Hermione said, and then reconsidered, but also possibly Dumbledore is running concurrent tests and not sharing information between them, Harry agreed. Which tells me something about his operational method. She stared at him for a moment. How are you always 3 steps ahead? I'm usually only 2 steps ahead, Harry said. Occasionally 1. The 3rd step is usually where something goes wrong. She laughed, unexpectedly, which made him smile, and across the room Ron raised a cup toward them both and said something cheerful that was lost in the noise, and the celebration continued, and Harry felt the warmth of it and let himself feel it fully and didn't qualify it. The holidays arrived with the castle half emptying. Harry stayed. The Dursleys had not been given the option of having him back for Christmas, a communication he'd made in his reply to their grudging acknowledgement that he was at school, and there was something profoundly satisfying about spending Christmas morning in Hogwarts with Ron and the extraordinary noise of a Weasley care package arriving by owl. He received gifts from people he hadn't expected to receive gifts from. Hermione sent a book on advanced charms theory with a note that was characteristically precise and warm by equal measure. Neville sent fudge that his grandmother had made, with a note explaining it was a thank you for the potions tutoring Harry had been quietly providing on Thursday afternoons. Hagrid sent rock cakes that were structurally ambitious. And there was one package he didn't recognize. No note. Wrapping like smoke, dark and soft, that dissolved when he touched it, leaving in his hands a cloak that fell like water and weighed almost nothing and which, when he held it up, made his hands and forearms and then the rest of his body disappear. An invisibility cloak. He held it for a long moment in the thin Christmas morning light while Ron made sounds of recognition and reverence across the room. He turned it over in his hands, feeling its magical signature, old, extraordinarily old, the kind of old that had its own gravity. Not just quality craftwork. Something more fundamental. The cloak resonated with his magic at a different frequency than the wand, less personal, more true, like something that had always been his and was simply arriving home. There was no note. But he knew, with a certainty that was more than logic, that Dumbledore had sent it. He didn't know why yet. Another piece of the game board. Another thing that was simultaneously a gift and a move. He kept the cloak. It was his father's, or had been, the provenance was in its magic. He would figure out Dumbledore's reasons later. He used it that night. The Mirror of Erised was on the 4th floor in a room that the castle appeared to have rearranged to contain, because the corridor Harry had found it in wasn't on any map he'd made and felt new in the way that ancient buildings occasionally felt new, a room that had been waiting to be needed. The mirror was large and gold-framed, with an inscription across the top, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. He read it in under 5 seconds, I show not your face but your heart's desire. He stood in front of it, in the dark, under the cloak he'd removed to look at the glass properly, and he looked at what it showed him. He stood there for a long time. The mirror showed him, himself, standing in what looked like the common room but with a quality of ease in his posture that was different from how he stood in waking life, though he was working toward it. Beside him, not behind him, not in front of him, beside him at exactly the same level, was Raven. Not the child Raven of his first memories, not any single point in their 3 years of intermittent contact, but something older, the quality of a person fully arrived at themselves. The two of them in the mirror were talking, laughing at something, and around them there were other people, fragments of faces he half recognized, Ron's red hair, Hermione's wild curls, others less defined, but the center of it, the specific thing the mirror was offering him as the deepest truth of his wanting, was the quality of beside her. Not needing her. Not dependent. Just, beside her. Present. Chosen. Both of them choosing. He stood there until he heard the quality of the castle change the way it changed when 3 in the morning became 4, and then he put the cloak back on and walked back to Gryffindor Tower and lay in his bed for a while looking at the canopy above him, thinking about what the mirror had shown him, and what it meant, and whether it was too much to want something that simple. He decided it wasn't. He wasn't going back to the mirror. He understood, instinctively, why it would be dangerous to, the specific trap of it, how a person could empty their life into the gap between what they wanted and what they had. The mirror was true, but it was static, and the only way to make the thing it showed real was to live toward it, not to stand in front of the glass. He went to sleep. He dreamed of flying. She came through on a Tuesday in January. Harry felt the dimensional transit settling like a key turning. The anchor had been built across the summer's visits and Raven's meticulous maintenance, and now it opened like a door that had been well made and well used. He was in the courtyard with Ron and Neville when he felt it, and he stood up from the bench without explaining and walked toward the entrance hall, and she was there. She stood in the entrance hall of Hogwarts with her cloak and her gem and her grey skin with the quality of someone who occupied space decisively, and Harry walked toward her, and she watched him come with an expression that was specifically her, that contained warmth, the attention that was complete without being obvious. And he stopped in front of her and they looked at each other across the span of time since he'd been 8 and she'd been whoever she'd been at 8 in Demon Heritage years. Which remained usefully ambiguous, and he said, "Hello." "You're taller," she said. "Happens sometimes." He looked at her steadily for a moment. "Are you staying?" "A few days. The anchor is stable enough." She looked up at the entrance hall, the grand staircase, the portraits, the quality of the castle's ancient accumulated presence washing over her in a way he could see her reading, her empathic sense opening to it carefully. Her eyes went a shade brighter, which happened when she encountered large amounts of concentrated emotion. "It's extraordinary," she said. "Yes." He watched her feel the castle. "It knows you're here." "I can tell." She looked at him. "How?" "The portraits have all turned to look at you." She looked up at the nearest portrait, a medieval wizard who was indeed looking at her with the specific interest of a painted mind encountering something genuinely novel, and the faintest smile crossed her face, which was the real Raven smile, not rare exactly but specific, different from the dry edge of her humor. "You're going to be noticed," he said. "I should prepare you for that. I've been noticed before. Not by wizards." He tilted his head. "Dumbledore will want to speak with you." "I think that's inevitable within, Harry." McGonagall's voice came from the top of the staircase. Harry looked up. McGonagall was descending with the specific purposeful quality of someone who had been notified and was responding with appropriate speed. She looked at Raven with the assessment of a highly competent person encountering something outside their existing categories, took in the dimensional signature that would presumably read as nothing quite like anything in her experience, and said, with admirable composure, "Would you and your guest care to come to my office?" "Yes, Professor," Harry said. They followed her up. McGonagall's office smelled of parchment and tea and the particular note of a professional space that had been lived in long enough to have a character. She sat across from them, and Raven sat beside Harry with the easy uprightness of her posture, and McGonagall looked at them both and said, "Who are you?" "Raven," said Raven. "Just Raven?" "For official purposes, Rachel Roth." "You're not from this world?" "Not a question." "No." McGonagall looked at Harry. "You know each other?" "She found me when I was 8, Harry said. She's been visiting. The dimensional pathway she uses has been stable for about a year now." McGonagall was quiet for a moment, doing the math. "She found you at Privet Drive?" "Yes." Another pause, longer, during which McGonagall's expression went through several things that were not, Harry noted, about Raven at all but about Privet Drive. The expression that crossed her face during this pause was one he hadn't seen on her before, something older than professional composure, something guilty and careful and quickly recontained. She'd known. She'd had doubts about the placement and she'd deferred to Dumbledore and she'd known. "I see," she said, finally. "I don't have any complaint to register," Harry said, carefully. Not to let her off the hook, that wasn't it. Because the information was useful exactly as it was, an acknowledgement between them of what had been, without requiring anyone to perform recrimination that wouldn't change anything. "I'm here now. I'm fine. I wanted you to understand who Raven is and why she's here," because she's going to be in the school for a few days and it seemed better to be straightforward about it. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. There was the same quality Ollivander had had, the recalibration, the reassessment, the specific expression of someone encountering a thing that was making them revise previous conclusions substantially upward. She turned to Raven. "What are you, exactly? If that's not an impolite question." "It's fine," Raven said. "Half human, half demon. The specific kind of demon that interdimensional texts refer to as an Azarathian Trigon bloodline. My powers are empathic and telekinetic primarily, with dimensional transit capability and a soul self that has properties I'm still cataloging." McGonagall processed this with the focus of a woman who had been transfiguring things for 35 years and had encountered magical phenomena of considerable variety and was not about to let interdimensional demon hybrid be the thing that broke her composure. "And you've been influencing Harry's development." "I've been talking to him," Raven said. "And occasionally reorganizing kitchen cabinets." McGonagall looked at Harry. Harry said nothing. Something moved through McGonagall's face that might, in different circumstances, have been a smile. "You'll need to meet with the headmaster," she said. "I assumed," Raven said. "I'll arrange it for tomorrow." McGonagall stood, which meant the meeting was over. Then she paused. "Your room in the tower," she looked at Raven, reconsidering the standard dormitory situation in real time. "I'll arrange a guest room in the east wing. It's quieter and the enchantments are more flexible." She looked at Harry. "Classes continue as normal." "Of course," Harry said. "And Potter." She said his name with a quality that was different from her usual precision, something deliberate in it, something chosen. "It was well done. What you did for Miss Granger with the troll. And before that." She held his gaze for a moment. "All of it." She said it like she meant more than she was saying. He understood it that way. "Thank you, Professor," he said. They left her office and Raven fell into step beside him in the corridor and said, in a low voice, "She feels very guilty about something." "I know," he said. "She's going to do something about it." "Probably." He looked at her sideways. "What do you think?" "I think she's a good person who made a bad decision and knows it," Raven said. "Those people are more useful than bad people who know it, because they still have access to their own integrity." He considered that. "That's good. I have my moments." She looked at him sideways, in kind. "You've grown," she said, and she didn't mean height this time. "You noticed." "I was here for some of it," she said. "The rest I've been watching through the link." A pause. "It suits you." Something moved through him at that, warm and direct and distinctly uncategorized. He didn't file it this time. He let it stay in the open where he could feel it. "You should see the Great Hall," he said. "Come to dinner tonight." "Is that going to cause a scene?" "Probably," he said. "I thought you didn't mind being noticed." "I said I'd been noticed before," she corrected. "I didn't say I minded it." "A beat. But you'd better walk in first." He smiled. "Coward." "Tactician," she said, and the dry edge was there and warm underneath it, and he led the way toward the great hall and felt the castle around them hum with the accumulated satisfaction of very old stone bearing witness to something it recognized as significant. Dinner was exactly what he'd expected. The Great Hall noticed Raven approximately 4 seconds after she entered, which was longer than he'd predicted and which he attributed to the distraction of the food. Then the noticing spread from table to table like a wave, first the Hufflepuffs nearest the entrance, then the Ravenclaws, then the Gryffindors, then the Slytherins, with each house doing the noticing differently. Hufflepuff, open curiosity. Ravenclaw, assessment. Gryffindor, loud immediate interest, primarily from Fred and George Weasley who straightened in their seats with the unified energy of people who had found something entertaining. Slytherin, stillness, the precise kind that meant rapid internal calculation. Raven walked to the Gryffindor table and sat beside Harry with her cloak and her grey skin and her gem and the complete lack of self-consciousness of someone who'd been the most unusual person in any room they'd entered for their entire life and had simply gotten used to it. She picked up a fork. "They're staring," she observed. "Yes. Your friends," she said, with a slight tilt of her head toward Hermione and Ron across the table, who were doing the staring with the most complete attention. "Would you like to introduce me?" "Raven, this is Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley." "Hermione, Ron, Raven." Ron said, with absolute sincerity, "Brilliant." Hermione said, with the specific quality of someone managing a significant recalibration with characteristic precision, "You're the her." "I imagine so," Raven said. Hermione looked at Harry, back at Raven's gem, at the way the closest torchlight moved slightly strangely around her, responsive to her presence in the way magical fire was responsive to magical presence. "Half human," she said, not asking. "Half demon," Raven confirmed. "Trigonic bloodline," Hermione said, and Harry looked at her, and she said, "I've been reading about dimensional demonology since Harry mentioned you in October. There weren't many sources but the ones I found were interesting." She looked at Raven with the expression that meant she had a significant number of questions and was organizing them by importance. "Is it true that Trigon bloodline empathy can read magical intent as well as emotional state?" "Yes," Raven said, with the specific quality of someone who had just decided they liked this person. "Though the magical intent reading is less reliable than the emotional, it requires direct contact or extended proximity." "And the soul self," Hermione continued, leaning forward slightly. "Can it actually absorb curse energy?" "In theory and in limited practice," Raven said. "I haven't tested it extensively." "You should," Hermione said. "The theoretical implications for curse breaking alone." "You've been waiting for this conversation for 3 months, Harry said to Hermione. 2.5 months, she corrected. "I was careful about when I started researching." Ron, who had been watching this exchange with benign pleasure, reached for the potatoes and said, "She's brilliant, she's half demon, she's been looking after you since you were 8, and your first comment after introducing us is to start a technical conversation. This is the most you thing that's happened this year." "It was Hermione's technical conversation," Harry said. "You knew it would be," Ron said. "That's practically the same thing." The table went back to noise and food and the warm complexity of people who'd chosen each other, and at the staff table the headmaster was looking at Raven with an attention that was considerably more careful than his usual, and Raven, without looking up from her plate, said to Harry in a voice too low for anyone else, "Dumbledore." "I know. He's not afraid," she said. "He's interested. He's running scenarios." "That's what I thought." He picked up his goblet. "Tomorrow's meeting is going to be worth watching." "You're looking forward to it," she said, with the slight edge that meant she was. "Aren't you?" A pause. "Yes," she said, honestly. "A bit." Outside the tall windows, the sky over Scotland had gone very dark and very clear, and the candles in the great hall burned in their thousands above the students of Hogwarts, and the castle, which had been standing for 1,000 years and had borne witness to the full range of what humans did with magic and with each other, was paying a specific kind of attention to the boy with the lightning bolt scar and the girl with the jewel on her forehead, and if its stones could have expressed opinions, they would have expressed something very close to, yes. These two. Watch these two. Chapter 4. The face behind the turban. Dumbledore's office smelled of lemon and old books and something underneath both of those that Raven identified in the first 3 seconds as the specific scent of accumulated power, not the sharp burn of active magic, but the sedimentary kind, layered over decades, the way a room smelled when very significant decisions have been made in it repeatedly for a very long time. She didn't say this. She sat in the chair beside Harry and looked at the office with the systematic attention she brought to new environments and catalogued, the portraits of sleeping headmasters, the silver instruments that twirled and measured things she didn't yet have names for, the sorting hat on its shelf looking considerably more alert than it had any reason to at 9 in the morning, the bird on the perch that was either a phoenix or the most extraordinary fake she'd ever encountered, and Albus Dumbledore himself, who sat across from them with his fingers laced and his half-moon glasses reflecting candlelight and the quality of a man who had prepared for this meeting carefully enough that the preparation wasn't visible. She was reading him. She always read a room. What she found in Dumbledore was complicated in the specific way that genuinely intelligent people with genuinely complex motivations were complicated, not the easy villainy of someone who'd stopped caring about others, but the more difficult thing, someone who cared enormously, who had built his entire architecture of action on that care, and who had over decades of consequentialist reasoning allowed the caring to calcify into something that looked, from the inside, like love and looked, from a slight angle, like something else. He was looking at Harry. The quality of it was, she searched for the right word and found it, bereaved. Not currently. More like someone who had been bereaved and was now looking at the thing that had made them bereft and finding it different from what they'd prepared for. Harry, Dumbledore said, with the warm grandfather quality fully deployed, it's very good to see you settled in so well. Thank you, sir, Harry said pleasantly. And Miss Roth. He turned to her with the same warmth and something sharper underneath it. I must confess I was surprised to learn of you. Though perhaps I shouldn't have been. What did you expect? Raven asked. I expected Harry to be, somewhat more alone, Dumbledore said. By this point in his education. He said it without apparent awareness of how it sounded, which was itself informative. Harry said nothing. Raven felt him feel everything in that sentence and hold it in the place where he held things that required processing without reaction. I'm going to be direct, if I may, Raven said. Please, said Dumbledore, and the warmth shifted slightly, recalibrating for the conversation, she noted, rather than for honesty, which was its own kind of answer. You know what I am, she said. And you've assessed me as either an asset or a variable. I'd like to understand which. A silence. The phoenix stirred on its perch. One of the sleeping portraits opened an eye. Both, perhaps, Dumbledore said, and this, she felt, was genuine, more genuine than anything else he'd said. You are, by any measure, a remarkable individual. Half-trigonic heritage, demonstrated dimensional transit capability, empathic range that I suspect is considerably wider than you've indicated publicly. He looked at her over his spectacles. And you have been with Harry since he was 8 years old. Yes. That is a significant thing, he said, and now there was something layered through the warmth, something that was either territorial or grief-adjacent or both. Harry has a very particular path ahead of him. The relationships he forms, the way he understands himself, these things matter enormously. They matter to him, Raven said. Not to the path. In my experience, Dumbledore said, they are not separable. In mine, she said, the problem with treating a person's relationships as relevant primarily because of the path they're on is that it stops you seeing the person. The silence this time had a different quality. Dumbledore looked at her, and she looked back, and she felt him do the thing that very powerful people did when they encountered a challenge they hadn't anticipated from a direction they hadn't expected, the brief recalibration, the quiet adjustment of assessment. You're here to protect him, he said. I'm here because he asked me to come, she said. And because I wanted to. Another pause. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that was, if she was reading it correctly, and she was quite confident she was reading it correctly, something close to respect. Reluctant, but real. He turned to Harry. Your first term has been, not what I expected, he said. I hope it's been satisfactory, Harry said, which was so clean and so pleasant and so completely not what it sounded like that Raven felt the impulse to look at him sideways and very deliberately didn't. Satisfactory is one word. Dumbledore studied him. You're more prepared than I anticipated. I've been reading, Harry said. And thinking. And I've had good conversations. A slight pause. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss? The question landed with the quiet precision of someone naming the thing everyone was not quite discussing. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Then, the third-floor corridor. The restricted one, Harry said, with complete ease. You've noticed it. I've noticed most of the school. He met Dumbledore's gaze. Is there something you want me to know about it? Raven watched this exchange with the specific quality of attention she used when she wanted to understand a dynamic entirely before weighing in. Dumbledore was doing something, not quite a test, not quite a disclosure, something that occupied the space between. He was checking whether Harry knew things, not by asking directly, but by opening a door to see if Harry walked toward it. And Harry was not walking toward the door, because Harry had understood the game board and had decided, with a clarity Raven found quietly extraordinary, not to be a piece on it. There is something I'd like you to know, Dumbledore said finally. The corridor is dangerous. What's there is well protected, but the protection is layered. I would not want a curious student to stumble into something meant for more experienced hands. That's very clear, sir, Harry said. I appreciate you telling me. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who was no longer entirely sure which conversation they were having. Then, very well. He looked between them. Miss Roth, how long do you intend to stay? A few days, she said. The anchor requires maintenance. And will you be returning? Yes. Then, he said, with the specific quality of someone making a decision they've been turning over for 30 seconds and have concluded is the best available option, perhaps we should establish a formal understanding. About your visits. Their frequency and scope. I think that's reasonable, Raven said. As long as the understanding is mutual. A pause. Mutual. You'll know I'm here when I'm here, she said. And I'll know the school's expectations. That seems fair. The smile that crossed Dumbledore's face was real, smaller than his usual ones, without the deployed warmth, more like the expression of someone encountering an argument they find genuinely respectable rather than just manageable. Fair, he agreed. Yes. That will do. They left the office 20 minutes later, and in the corridor outside, Raven and Harry walked for 30 seconds in silence, and then Harry said, quietly, well. He's not what I expected, she said. Good or bad? Both, she said. Which is more complicated? She looked at him sideways. He genuinely loves you. In his way. Harry was quiet. It's the in his way that's the problem, she said. The love is real. The method of it is wrong. She paused. He sees you as someone who needs to be preserved until you're needed. He thinks of it as protection. He doesn't see that it's the thing it is. Which is management, Harry said, and it was the same word she'd used when he was 8, in the kitchen of 4, Privet Drive, and he said it with the same flat precision, a thing named, not a wound displayed. She nodded. I know, he said. I've known for a while. He looked ahead down the corridor. It doesn't change what needs to happen. No, she agreed. What needs to happen is the stone. They found the entry to the lower protection system on a Thursday. It had taken 3 evenings of careful mapping, Harry with the invisibility cloak and Raven moving as a shadow, her sole self bleeding into the castle's own darkness in a way that made her effectively undetectable to portraits and ghosts and the ambient awareness of the building itself. The castle, she'd established, knew she was there. It had decided, apparently, that this was acceptable. She felt it around her as a presence, not hostile, more like the quality of being watched by something very old and very patient that had concluded you were not a problem. The trapdoor was below the 3-headed dog, which they'd named Fluffy for operational simplicity, following Ron's lead, and which Raven had established could be neutralized by music. She'd found this by sitting cross-legged 10 feet from the slightly open door while Harry provided lookout, opening her empathic sense to the dog's emotional register, and determining that the triple canine brain was susceptible to auditory input in a way that would be exploitable. It responds to sound the way certain anxious nervous systems respond to rhythm, she explained, to Harry and Hermione in the common room later. Not actually calmed, more suspended. The music doesn't relax it, it interrupts the guard function processing. Hermione had a flute in her trunk, which she'd brought to school in a moment of optimistic multi-interest planning that she'd abandoned by November. She produced it now. That'll work, Raven confirmed. Ron looked between the three of them. I want to register that this conversation has moved from, let's learn what's down there, to let's actively go down there, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, and I'd like it noted that I'm coming too. Obviously, Harry said. Just so it's noted, Ron said. Neville was not in this conversation. Harry had made a specific decision about that, not because he doubted Neville, but because Neville's courage was real and precisely the kind that would walk into something lethal before asking questions, and the lethal question ratio here was not yet favorable. He'd told Neville, with honesty, that there were things in motion in the school that he was working on managing, and that if things developed in a direction that required more hands, Neville would be one of the first people he asked. Neville had received this with the gravity of someone who understood they were being taken seriously and responded accordingly. He'd also started bringing Harry tea on the evenings Harry spent on the common room couch looking like he was thinking about 5 things, which was so specifically Neville that it was almost unbearable. The protection layers, once they were below the dog and through the trapdoor, turned out to be a sequence that felt like something designed by people who were simultaneously very clever and completely unacquainted with each other's approach. Devil's Snare, botanical, neutralized easily, Raven simply pulled Harry and Ron through with her soul self before Hermione got the sunlight incantation out, which was faster and produced a shower of sparks from the plant that Hermione observed with detached botanical interest. Enchanted flying keys, Harry on a broom in 20 seconds, Raven hovering at the edge of the space with her empathic sense following the keys pattern, which operated on a mathematical distribution she identified as a Fibonacci spiral and called out to Harry, who adjusted his pursuit angle and had the right key in 45 seconds. Life-size chess, Ron's domain, Ron's decision, Ron in his element in a way that was both impressive and completely specific to him. Raven watched Ron play the chess board and felt something she didn't often feel in combat or strategy situations, genuine admiration for a skill entirely outside her own. He played the pieces with the specific calm of someone who understood that chess, unlike most conflicts, was a game of complete information, which meant every sacrifice was calculated. He sacrificed himself last and did it with the steady deliberateness of someone who'd worked out it was the only winning move and made it anyway. He went down hard. Knight to the jaw. Harry was beside him immediately, checking, and Raven did the medical assessment in 3 seconds, concussed, badly, but intact, no skull fracture, the pieces had been rougher than the enchantment strictly required, which told her something about the emotional state of whoever had designed this protection. He needs the hospital wing, she said. Ron, half-conscious, said, go, with the specific incoherence of someone who was prioritizing correctly despite impaired function. Hermione said, I'll stay with him. She said it with a firmness that closed discussion. She looked at Harry. You and Raven go. Come back. Harry looked at her for a moment with the specific quality of someone banking something, adding this to the account of what Hermione Granger was made of. We'll be back, he said. He and Raven went through the door. The troll in the next room was already unconscious, someone had handled it before them, which meant someone else was in this system, which confirmed what they'd already assumed. The logic puzzle was Snape's, the riddle of the potion bottles, which Harry read in 45 seconds and solved in 50, pointing to the correct bottle without hesitation. Right bottle for forward, he said, smallest bottle for going back. Raven read the bottles herself, confirmed, and said, only enough for one person to go forward. Harry picked up the forward bottle. He looked at her. I know what's ahead, he said. So do I, she said. Voldemort. Quirrell and Voldemort. He held her gaze. I need you to go back and make sure Ron and Hermione are out. I'm not leaving you, Raven. He said her name with the specific quality that wasn't about authority. He didn't do authority with her, neither of them did authority with each other, but about the plain honesty of someone saying something they'd thought through. You know what you are and what I am. I have the Scar connection, which means Voldemort has a problem with getting too close to me even in his diminished state. My mother's protection is still live. You are Trigonic bloodline. If Voldemort's fragment in my scar recoils from you, the piece of him in Quirrell will react too. That makes things unpredictable in an enclosed space. He looked at her steadily. I can manage him. I'm not afraid of him. She looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him, she always was, it was her nature, it was the thing she couldn't turn off and didn't try to, and what she was reading was true. He was not afraid. Not the performed fearlessness of someone managing fear, but the genuine article, the specific confidence of someone who had been working toward this moment for 3 years and knew what they were walking into and had decided what they were going to do about it. If anything goes wrong, she said, I'll feel it through the link. I know. I'll come through the wall, she said. Literally. Walls don't stop me. I know that too. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she did something she very rarely did in operational situations. She reached out and pressed 2 fingers briefly to the back of his hand, and through the mirror link she felt him feel it, the specific warmth of the gesture that was both practical, grounding, orienting, and something else that neither of them was naming yet but both of them felt. Don't be longer than you need to be, she said. I won't, he said. He drank the potion and walked through the dark door. She stood in the potion bottle room and counted her own heartbeats and kept the link open and went back to Ron and Hermione. She felt the moment he walked into the mirror room. The link sharpened. Ron was vertical by the time she reached the chess room, groggy, annoyed at his own grogginess, and sustained by the specific Weasley stubbornness that apparently continued to function below full consciousness. Hermione had her hand on his arm and was monitoring him with the focused calm of someone who had decided that panic was not information and had set it aside. Harry? Hermione said, looking behind Raven. Through. He's fine. Raven crouched in front of Ron. Can you stand properly? I'm standing, Ron said. He was listing slightly left but his eyes were tracking. What's happening? Harry is through the last door. She looked at Hermione. We need to get Ron out and get someone who can help, McGonagall, specifically. Not Dumbledore. McGonagall. Hermione read this calibration instantly. Not Dumbledore. Not yet. She felt through the link, Harry was still calm, was moving through the room, was encountering something. She could feel the other presence now, the one she'd identified in Quirrell from across the hall but which was sharper here, more concentrated, the foreign darkness that was Voldemort's fragment pressing against the edges of Harry's awareness. The scar connection was active and Harry had it open deliberately, she realized. He was using it, the way she told him he eventually could, as a window. Looking through it. Assessing. He's all right, she said. You can feel him, Hermione said, with the specific quality of observation rather than question. Yes. Through the mirror. The mirror, the link, the scar connection. She stood. It's complicated. Hermione looked at her for a moment with the expression that meant she was processing, had more questions, and was prioritizing them correctly. Let's get Ron out, she said. They got Ron out. McGonagall arrived at the base of the trapdoor 3 minutes after Hermione found her, which told Raven something about McGonagall's ambient preparedness. She looked at the unconscious Fluffy, the sprung trapdoor, Ron who was now alert but visibly worse for the chess encounter, Hermione who was composed in a way that required active maintenance, and Raven who was standing very still with her eyes slightly unfocused. Where is Harry? McGonagall asked, her voice carrying the specific tension of someone keeping professional composure over something that was costing her. Through the last protection, Raven said. He's in the mirror room. McGonagall looked at the trapdoor. Then at Raven. Is he? The link surged. Raven felt it before she heard anything, a spike of heat through the connection, not pain exactly but intensity, the feeling of Harry's magic moving at full capacity, not defensively but purposefully. She felt him make a decision. She felt him act on it. She went through the wall. Literally. She pulled the shadow self out and dropped into the subcastle space and moved toward Harry's signal through stone and earth the way she moved through everything, with the specific precision of someone who understood the geometry of between places, who had traveled dimensional seams and knew how to navigate the dark spaces in solid things. The mirror room opened around her like water parting, and she came back into material space in the corner of the room and saw Quirrell at the mirror, sweating, frantic, his reflection showing him something that was evidently not what he wanted. The mirror was doing its work, showing him the stone in his hand, which the enchantment required he want to find rather than use, and Quirrell wanted to use it desperately, and the mirror was not giving it up. Harry stood 12 feet away with his wand out, watching. And on the back of Quirrell's head, she could feel it before she saw it, because the feeling came first, the cold foreign darkness that she'd been reading in increments across months of exposure. There was something else. Looking at Harry from under the turban that Quirrell had begun to unwrap with shaking hands. Harry looked at her when she appeared. He didn't startle, he'd felt her coming through the link. He looked at her with a brief, complete look that was, "I'm all right. Wait. Watch." Quirrell turned. The turban fell away. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was barely a face, white as paper, flat where it should have been structured, with red eyes that burned with the specific cold intelligence of something that had existed in the space between death and life for long enough to have lost most of what made the distinction matter. It looked at Harry with the particular intensity of something that had been waiting for this specific moment for 10 years. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, through Quirrell's back of head, and his voice had the quality of something that had once been beautiful and wasn't anymore. "We meet at last. Properly." "Not really," Harry said. "I've been watching you all year." A pause. The red eyes moved, assessed, found Raven in the corner of the room. Something happened in them. The cold intelligence became something sharper. "Her," Voldemort said, with a quality in the word that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite rage but was the specific reaction of something that recognized a category of threat it hadn't anticipated encountering. The scar on Harry's forehead pulsed visibly, she could see it from across the room, the fragment inside reacting to her proximity the way it had reacted through the link. "Recoiling. Problem?" Harry asked, pleasantly. "Trigonic bloodline," Voldemort said, and now the cold focus was complete, he was past the surprise, recalibrating, the way very dangerous minds recalibrated under pressure. "I should have anticipated, the Potter boy would find something like," he stopped. Refocused on Harry. "The stone," he said. "Give me the stone and I let you walk away. Both of you." "The stone is in my pocket," Harry said. Raven looked at the mirror. She felt through the link, yes. He'd gotten it. The mirror had given it to him, to the boy who wanted to find it but not use it, had placed it cleanly in his pocket in the moment he'd looked into the glass and the mirror had read him and found him clean. She felt a flash of something from him at that, not surprise, exactly, but the specific feeling of being seen accurately, which was rarer than it should have been for him. Voldemort's expression, Quirrell's body's expression, the two of them moving in an unsettling coordination of will, shifted. "Then you'll give it to me," he said, with the quality of an absolute statement, and Quirrell moved toward Harry. Harry didn't step back. He raised his wand, and Raven felt him do what she'd never seen anyone do with a wand. She'd watched him practice, had helped him think about intention-based casting for 3 years, had explained over and over that the magic was not separate from the caster but continuous with them, and he opened the continuous part. All the way. Not the measured careful 60% he used in class, not the pragmatic efficiency he used in the troll incident, but all of it, the full reach of what Harry Potter was when he stopped moderating for other people's comfort. The spell he cast was Expelliarmus, which was a disarming charm, a first-year spell, the most basic offensive magic in the curriculum, and it came out of his wand as a jet of scarlet light that was approximately 4 times the correct size and hit Quirrell in the chest with an impact that lifted Quirrell completely off his feet. Quirrell hit the mirror. The mirror cracked. But that wasn't all that happened, because Quirrell's hands had reached for Harry in the fraction of a second before the spell connected, and Quirrell's hands on Harry's arms produced something that was the opposite of what Quirrell had intended. The same protection that had been there for 10 years, Lily Potter's blood-deep magic, activated on contact. Quirrell's hands began to blister. Quirrell screamed. The sound was not entirely Quirrell's, there was something underneath it, the cold voice splitting from the human voice, separating. Raven felt it happen. She felt the fragment in Voldemort's possessed consciousness begin to pull away from Quirrell's dying body. Quirrell was dying, she could feel it, the possession was a two-way cost and the protection contact was accelerating what the possession had started, and the fragment was looking for a new anchor, and the obvious anchor was, "Harry, move," she said. He moved. He stepped back sharply and Raven crossed the room in 2 strides and put herself between Harry and the fragment's direction of travel, and she opened her soul self. Not the way she opened it for transit. The way she'd been thinking about for 8 months since she'd first deliberately touched the Horcrux resonance through the link and felt it recoil. She opened the soul self and let her nature, the trigonic blood, her father's inheritance that she'd spent her whole life containing, the specific quality of interdimensional demonic darkness, let it open, not weaponized but present, fully, uncontained. A darkness that knew itself completely. The fragment hit her soul self like a wave hitting a seawall. She felt it. It wasn't painless, the contact was cold and wrong and had the particular quality of malice that was specific to Voldemort, a coldness that had started with pain and become something that fed on others' pain, recognizable because she'd felt her father's coldness and understood the family resemblance and the difference. Her father was vast and uncaring. Voldemort was this, a cramped, desperate cold, a burning that was actually freezing, a hunger that had eaten everything including itself. She held it in her soul self for 3 seconds. She felt it thrash. Then she let it go, not into Harry, not into any anchor, but into the space between, the dimensional seam she knew better than anyone in this room, the dark places in reality where things with no right to exist went when they couldn't exist anymore. The fragment dissolved. Not destroyed, fragments of a soul weren't destroyed that easily, she knew that, this was dispersal, temporary, but neutralized for now, sent to a between place where it couldn't reach, couldn't anchor, couldn't act. Quirrell collapsed. The room was very quiet. Harry was standing 2 feet behind her, breathing in the controlled way of someone who'd been in a high-intensity situation and was now deliberately managing the descent from it. She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before on his face. She read it, something past gratitude, something that included fear, not of her, but the retroactive fear of something almost going wrong, and underneath that, and this was the part she was holding carefully, the thing that made the mirror link warm between them in a way that had nothing to do with any danger. "You're all right?" he said. "Yes." She looked at her hands. The soul self retracted, pulled back in, contained, and her hands were steady. "The fragment is dispersed. Not permanently. But not here." He nodded. He looked at Quirrell on the ground, the man was breathing, barely, with the shallow rapid quality of a fire dying down. "He needs Madame Pomfrey," Harry said. "He does." She looked at him. "Even him?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. "Even him. He was a victim of this before he was complicit." She held that for a moment, even him, and felt something that was specifically about Harry, the specific quality of someone who held complexity without collapsing it into simple categories because they themselves had been reduced to simple categories too many times. Even Quirrell, who had tried to kill him. Because that was the kind of person Harry Potter was when nobody was reducing him to a scar and a function. She picked up the mirror of Eriste in both hands. It was cracked from corner to corner, Quirrell's impact had split the glass, though the frame was intact. She could still feel the enchantment humming in it, still functioning in the fractured glass, and she thought about what Harry had seen in it and what she herself would see and didn't look. "The stone," she said. He reached into his pocket and placed the Philosopher's Stone on the floor between them. It was small, blood-red, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and it radiated a contained aliveness that she felt through her empathic sense as something between a heartbeat and a question. "Dumbledore needs to have it," Harry said. "It's Flammel's." "Yes." She looked at it. But Dumbledore should also know that his protection system failed. His protection system served its purpose, Harry said. It slowed things down long enough. She looked at him. You're being generous. I'm being accurate. The protections were good. They just weren't designed for someone with no desire for the stone working through them efficiently. He paused. He didn't think I was capable of this. No, she said. He didn't. Harry looked at the stone for another moment, then picked it up and pocketed it again. Let's get Quirrell out, he said. And then I imagined there'll be a conversation. Several, she said. Yes. He looked at her, and something in the look was the same thing she'd seen in the Mirrorlink when he'd said her name, the thing that lived in the warm thread between them and was growing more specific and less categorically ambiguous with every encounter. Thank you, he said. For the fragment. You would have handled it. Maybe. Differently. He held her gaze. That was extraordinarily brave. It was cold, she said, and the word meant both things. I know. I felt it through the link. He moved toward Quirrell without looking away from her immediately, and she noted that, and she held it, and neither of them said anything more about it, and there was no need to because the Mirrorlink was there between them carrying everything that the moment was made of. McGonagall came through the trapdoor system approximately 8 minutes later. She'd sent Hermione and Ron to the hospital wing, had retrieved another teacher, had moved with the quick authority of someone who had been waiting for this situation to resolve and was now dealing with its aftermath. She found the mirror room with Quirrell in the recovery position, the stone on the floor where Harry had placed it, Harry standing against the wall with his wand pocketed, and Raven beside him. She looked at all of this for a long time. The stone, she said. Safe, Harry said. Flamel should be informed. McGonagall's eyes moved to Quirrell. Voldemort was possessing him, Harry said. He attempted to retrieve the stone. He's been separated from the host. Quirrell needs medical attention. The fragment? McGonagall said, looking at Raven. Dispersed, Raven said. Temporarily. It's not gone but it can't act from where it is. McGonagall absorbed this. Then, the headmaster should know everything that happened here, Harry said. I'd like to be present for that conversation. She looked at him with the same expression she'd had in her office, the guilt-weighted one, the reassessment, the complicated internal reckoning of someone who had been deferring and was finding the cost of deferral more than she'd calculated. Yes, she said. You should be. Both of you. She levitated Quirrell and moved toward the exit, and Harry and Raven followed, and somewhere above them through stone and earth and trapdoor and three-headed dog and 6 layers of protective magic, the castle of Hogwarts was quietly reconfiguring the corridor to make the return journey shorter than the outward one, which was the closest it could come to expressing an opinion about how things had gone. Dumbledore arrived at Hogwarts at midnight. McGonagall had sent a Patronus, Harry had watched her do it, a silver cat that moved through the wall with purpose, and they had waited in the hospital wing while Madame Pomfrey worked on Quirrell and checked Ron and kept looking at Harry and Raven with an expression that was caught between professional obligation and intense personal curiosity. Ron was discharged by 10 with strict orders and the specific look of someone who'd been in a real fight and found out something about himself in it and was sitting with that quietly. Hermione sat beside Harry on the neighboring bed and didn't say anything for a long time, which with Hermione was a thing that required effort and was therefore significant, and which Harry appreciated as the specific expression of respect it was. You got the stone, she said finally. Yes. From the mirror. The mirror gave it to me. He looked at his hands. My deepest desire isn't the stone. So it gave it to me rather than showing it to me. She was quiet. What is your deepest desire? She asked, with the careful quality of someone asking something they think might be personal. Something real, he said, which was both vague and exactly true. Something chosen. She didn't push it. Raven, she said, after a moment, looking at where Raven stood at the window of the hospital wing, looking out at the grounds, her cloak around her. What she did in there, with the fragment, I felt it from the potion room. The air changed. She dispersed part of Voldemort's soul, Harry said. Using her soul self. The trigonic energy is incompatible with the kind of dark magic Voldemort uses. That's extraordinary, Hermione said. That's going to be significant. She looked at him. She did it for you. He looked at where Raven stood at the window. She did it because it needed to be done, he said, which was also true. And then, more quietly, and yes. Hermione looked at him with the expression that meant she had a conclusion she was keeping to herself, and she nodded once, and picked up her book, and said nothing further, which was perhaps the most thoughtful thing she'd done all year. Dumbledore arrived at midnight and stood in the hospital wing with his traveling robes and his gravity and the specific quality of a man who had been handed information he was still integrating. He looked at Quirrell's bed. Quirrell was alive, barely, hollowed by years of possession and the final contact burn, and looked at Harry, and looked at Raven, and looked at the stone that Harry placed on the bedside table between them. "You retrieved the stone," he said. "Yes. And the fragment of Voldemort, dispersed," Raven said. "Not destroyed. He'll reconstitute eventually, through whatever other anchors he has." Something moved through Dumbledore's face at other anchors, a flicker of surprised recalibration that confirmed what Harry had suspected about how much Dumbledore knew about the Horcruxes. More than he'd admitted. Perhaps not everything, but more. "You knew about his soul-splitting," Harry said. Flatly. Precisely. Not angry, he'd processed the anger at the Gringotts' accounting, had used it up, had nothing left for it right now, just accurate. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then, and this was what Raven had meant about the love being real, "Yes," he said. "I know something of it. Not everything." He looked at Harry directly. "I had planned to address that with you. In time." "How much time?" Harry asked. A pause. "Less time than I've been planning, clearly," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his voice that was, if not quite an apology, at least the neighbor of one, the specific acknowledgement of a man who was honest enough, under enough pressure, to recognize the gap between what he'd done and what he should have. "There are other Horcruxes," Harry said. "I'd like to know about them." "Harry, not everything at once," Harry said. "I'm not asking for everything at once. I'm asking for honesty. The kind where you tell me what concerns me when I'm old enough to be told." He looked at Dumbledore with the steady even gaze that wasn't confrontational but was immovable. "I'm not going to fall apart. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to become something you don't want me to be because you trusted me with the truth of what I am." A pause. "I've been managing the truth about myself for 11 years. I think I can be trusted with more of it." The silence in the hospital wing had a quality to it. Ron was very still. Hermione had her book closed. Madame Pomfrey had found something to do in the far corner of the room that required her complete attention. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long time. Then at Raven. Then back at Harry. "There is a great deal I should have done differently," he said, and the warmth in his voice was genuine and grief-colored and real. "A great deal." He looked at Harry's forehead. "At the scar. You are not what I planned for, Harry. In ways that are, considerably to your credit." "I had help," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore looked at Raven. His expression toward her had changed, not entirely, the assessment was still there, the strategic regard was still present, but it had shifted to include something that was nearer to respect than anything else she'd felt from him. "I think we need to have an honest conversation," he said. "All of us. Tomorrow, if you're willing." "Yes," Harry said. "Yes," Raven said. "Good." He picked up the stone from the bedside table and held it for a moment. His face did something complicated and private. "Nicholas Flamel has lived long enough," he said, "to no one in particular. He'll understand." He pocketed the stone and turned to go, and at the door he paused, and without turning back he said, "You should know, Harry, what you did tonight required a quality that is rarer than power. You could have used the stone. The mirror verified that you wouldn't. That is," he paused, searching, "then, your mother would have been very proud. Your father too." He left. The hospital wing was quiet. Harry looked at the window. He looked at his hands. He looked at Raven, who had come away from the window and was standing near him, and the mirror link between them was warm and specific and carrying the weight of the evening, and underneath that weight, undimmed, the particular quality of the thing it had always carried. "Are you all right?" she asked. He considered the question honestly. He thought about the mirror, and what it had shown him, and the stone in his pocket, and Quirrell on the ground, and the fragment dissolving in Raven's soul self, and Dumbledore at the door saying your mother would have been proud, in the voice of a man who had known Lily Potter and had loved her and had failed her son and knew it. "Yes," he said. "I think I am." He looked at her. "Because of the second part of your question." She blinked. "I only asked one question." "The one you didn't ask," he said. "Are you all right because of me?" "That one." She looked at him for a long moment with the stillness that was her particular brand of composure, not closed, not distant, but very complete, all the way present, the way she was when something was reaching her entirely. "Yes," she said, and it was the same word as before and had the weight of something much longer in it. "Good," Harry said. He turned back to look at the grounds through the window, and she stood beside him, and neither of them spoke again for a long time, and the mirror link was warm between them like a fire that had been burning for 3 years and knew exactly what it was.